Hi, Crime Junkies. I'm your host, Ashley Flowers.
And I'm Brit.
And the story I have for you today isn't just one story, but it started that way for me with Sandra Birchmore, which we covered in our last episode. I was shocked and outraged at how she was taken advantage of in the Police Explorer program. Because, my God, surely parents have to believe that sending their kids to learn from the police has to be the safest place for them. What a betrayal. But I began to wonder, was this the exception, or was this just one example of a system with deep-rooted problems that lets abuse thrive? And just as I was asking this very question, literally within 2 weeks of Sandra's story breaking, I saw a local news article. It said, IMPD officer tied to teen's suicide, ordered to write weekly journal in rare sentence. A teen who was part of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Explorer program. And as I dug into her story, I realized that we were just scratching the surface of a much, much bigger problem. The more I looked, the more I found. And me and our reporter Nina have spent months uncovering a systemic issue with the Explorer program that is required listening for everyone. Crime junkie or not, this is an episode that must be shared. Because you won't believe what has been happening right under our noses for decades. For Mike Gatliff, time stopped on Monday, November 2nd, 2015, right around 4:41 p.m. And now his life is split into before and after. Before, he was living out the most average day. Went to work at the Indianapolis Police Pawn Unit, came home to the house that he shared with his wife Janice, their 18-year-old daughter Heidi, and their 21-year-old son. He'd just gotten out of his car and was bringing up some leaf bags from the yard when this familiar face came up to him. 29-year-old IMPD officer Francisco Olmos, known to him and most as Paco. Now, even though Mike's a civilian employee for IMPD, the only reason he really knew Francisco was because of Heidi. She had been a part of the department's Explorer program for nearly 2 years, and he knew that she'd done some ride-alongs with Francisco over the past few months. And Francisco had never just shown up at their house before, unannounced and not in uniform, but he says that he's there that day to talk to Heidi about a case.
She's an explorer. What kind of case would you need to talk to, an explorer part? They're not working cases. They're not officers.
Yeah, you're right. They're not. But Mike isn't even concerned. Along with working for IMPD, he's also a fire department chaplain. So, their whole family trusts first responders. And IMPD was Heidi's life, basically. I mean, everything she's done has been working up to getting on the force. Maybe she's getting a little inside peek, like any crime junkie would love.
Oh, for sure.
It would be great, whatever. So he tells Francisco that, he just got home, but Heidi's car is in the driveway, so she's got to be inside. So, come on in. He invites Francisco in through the garage, but Francisco stays at the entrance while Mike goes inside to get Heidi. Now, inside, her bedroom door is closed. Mike knocks. And then he walks in when she doesn't answer. And this is the moment that time stops. Because once he opened that door, he would always be living in the after. After he found Heidi laying in bed where he kissed her goodbye that morning. Before, she was warm and alive, his beautiful daughter with so much potential. And after, she is still and pale with a gun near her head and her hand close to it. Now, Mike rushes to Heidi and calls out for Francisco, realizing that he hadn't followed him in. And Francisco comes running. But even though he's the trained officer, it's Mike who slips into first responder mode. He's the one that calls 911 at 4:41 p.m., and he's the one who gives dispatchers what they need, while Francisco is just falling apart. Medics and IMPD officers arrive within minutes, and Heidi is pronounced dead there at the scene. And the rest of the night is just a blur of chaos. Mike calls Janice at work, bringing her into the after, and she remembers the moment that she collapsed and had to be driven home. There, friends and family gather while police seal off the house. Officers line the street in a show of respect for Heidi as one of their own. And everyone is left reeling, trying to make sense of something that makes no sense. I mean, the day before, everything seemed pretty normal. The family went to church, like always. Later, Heidi skipped baking cookies with her mom. She said she had plans with a friend. And then when she came home, she seemed a little upset, but nothing major. She went back out, came home again sometime later. Mike didn't see her get back, which was like a little odd.
But there was nothing that like screamed crisis.
Not even close. Mike is trained to recognize the warning signs of suicide, and he hadn't noticed any. Plus, like, Heidi is known for her upbeat personality. She is bright and bubbly and driven. She loved helping people. I mean, that's what drew her to law enforcement. In middle school, she actually dreamed of the FBI, but over time, she set her sights on IMPD, the department that she got to know through the Explorers. Mike was actually the one who'd first heard about the program and thought it would be a good fit for her. And he was right. Heidi had ADHD. She struggled with a traditional classroom, but exploring let her learn by doing. She worked security at the Indianapolis 500. She helped on mall patrols. I mean, her confidence was growing with every single shift. And her favorite part were the ride-alongs. Sitting beside an officer, following calls, watching arrests unfold, it felt like the real thing. And it really cemented her desire to become a cop. And just days before her death, she had been promoted to post commander and captain, something that she was thrilled about. So for Heidi's parents and her brother, like, this isn't just grief, it is whiplash. But even in that grief and their darkest moments, her family has never disputed that Heidi's gunshot wound was self-inflicted. I mean, she even left a note on Mike's computer, which they found later. But there still are so many questions about what led up to her death and why.
And the note didn't give any explanation.
Not one that they fully understood, or not one that like filled in all the gaps of how things ended up the way they did. Like in the note, she apologized to her parents. She said it wasn't their fault, but that she'd made some mistakes. She felt like she was hurting people's careers. It was vague. It was a little confusing for them. And there was nothing in recent memory that they could call back to that made this make sense. And listen, credit where credit is due for IMPD, because they are going to get their fair share of heat in this episode too. They did the thing that you're supposed to do. Every death should be treated as suspicious until you definitely rule that it's not. And even though everyone was in agreement that this was a suicide, there was still a mystery surrounding it. And it quickly becomes obvious that what led up to it might involve one of their own. Now, Britt, I know you have a teenager. What is the one thing that can give you insight into their life? The portal into their internal world.
Their phone.
Correct. Hidden in Heidi's calls and texts might be all the answers that her family is looking for. And that phone, still playing music, was near her head when her dad found her. So police collected it and asked her parents for the passcode. But Mike and Janice are kind of taken back, like, passcode? Heidi's not supposed to have a passcode. They have a house rule against it. But detectives tell them the phone's locked. And listen, it's not like Heidi couldn't have broken that rule if there were things that she didn't want her parents to see or know after she was gone. So they toss out some guesses. Police try them, but nothing works. And eventually the phone disables completely. And there's just something that feels wrong about this. You see, after Mike found his daughter, Francisco had asked Mike to use Heidi's phone so that he could call the advisor who ran her Explorer post.
Call them for what? And also, use your own phone?
Mike didn't know why he was asking. I mean, he had, in that moment, zero brain space to even consider the weirdness of the request.
1,000%.
Yeah, I mean, he just found his daughter. But Francisco was able to place that call, presumably without having a passcode to open the phone, which means
Francisco locked the phone.
Yeah, and there is only one reason that you would need to do that. And that is if you don't want anyone to see what's on it. Everything around Francisco is starting to stink. He came to talk to Heidi about a case, which makes no sense now that the blinders are off. He froze and freaked out in a moment of crisis and had her dad be the one to call 911. And then he used her phone to make a call after they found her. And now no one can get into the phone. Like, come on. So for all those reasons, detectives have a conversation with Francisco pretty quickly, like the next day, Tuesday, November 3rd. And he tells them that he met Heidi when she was on a ride-along with an ambulance crew. That was back in January, just after her 18th birthday. And Janice told us it was actually maybe even earlier at a charity boxing event when Heidi was still 17. But either way, they started talking, and Francisco encouraged her to join him on patrol. He worked a high-crime area known as the Swamp, where something was always happening, and Heidi jumped at the chance.
So this was after she joined the Explorers.
Right, she'd actually already been in the program for over a year by that point. And Francisco had no official explorer role, but it kept them in each other's orbit, basically. So he says they grew close, about 15 ride-alongs, working out together a couple times a week, and talking almost daily through text and Snapchat.
That doesn't sound normal, right?
It shouldn't be.
Okay.
I mean, like many Explorer posts across the country, IMPD's program operates under Learning for Life, which is an affiliate of Scouting America.
Okay.
And that organization forbids close social relationships between leaders and participants, no matter their age. But Francisco doesn't work with the post, so that rule technically wouldn't apply to him. And at the time, IMPD didn't have a policy barring officers from getting involved with explorers. That was only added this year, 2025. Now, technically, since Heidi was 18, if something was going on between them, it wouldn't have been illegal.
But
ethically,
come on.
yeah, it's a different story ethically. He is a uniformed officer in a position of authority hanging out with a teenager who clearly looked up to him. So even if you take Francisco at his word, which is that nothing sexual happened, it still feels wrong to me. But anyways, Francisco tells police that Heidi seemed fine Sunday night. They'd even made plans to work out that week. But by Monday afternoon, something had changed. He said that she called him out of the blue at around 1 o'clock, told him she couldn't talk to him anymore, but that she loved him and it wasn't his fault. She thanked him for everything and then hung up, which rattled him. And he tried calling back and then finally drove to her house. And ultimately, he admits that he lied to Mike. He didn't want to alarm him if this turned out to be nothing, so he made up the whole thing about having to talk to her about a case.
Yeah, so then he hangs back and lets her dad find her.
Zero spine.
Yeah.
And lots of ick feelings about this for me. But still, nothing illegal that we know of. Where he crossed a hard line in the sand was even touching her phone. I mean, this dude's been a cop for 10 years. He knows not to touch evidence in an active death investigation. And if he really needed to contact the Explorer advisor, he could have asked responding officers to reach out.
Or use his own phone.
Or like you said before, use his own phone. Yeah, it does not sit right. So this is when the case is bumped to IMPD's Special Investigations Unit. And while they get their ducks in a row, a digital forensic expert is trying to get into Heidi's phone. And Mike and Janice are just trying to survive each day. And they are left in kind of an unclear position. They know that there is an ongoing investigation, something involving Francisco and Heidi's phone, but they're not getting any real details and they don't fully understand why this is happening for a clear-cut suicide. So one of the people that they lean on during this time is 32-year-old Daniel Bowman. He was Heidi's Explorer advisor, her mentor, the cop running the meetings and taking her ambition seriously. And now that Heidi's gone, he really steps up for the Gatlifs personally. The Explorers help with funeral arrangements. Daniel carries Heidi's urn and gives a speech. And he doesn't just forget about the family once those big moments are over. He keeps checking in. He keeps sharing stories about Heidi. And for Janice especially, he becomes a lifeline. Because Mike and their son grieve in a different way. They're very private, they're very quiet, but Janice needs to talk about her daughter, and Daniel is always available to listen. By the end of 2015, he is practically family. He seems like a steady source of support, someone who cared about Heidi's future and shares their pain and their questions. But he also said that he feels guilty because of how everything went down. According to Daniel, sometime the morning of November 2nd, or in the early afternoon, Heidi sent him a Snapchat saying that he was a great guy and she loved him, which wasn't like her. And then she sent another, and he replied asking what was going on, but she never answered. Court records show that he sent her 16 messages over the next few hours, and none of them were even read. And then later that day, his phone rang, and it was Heidi's number calling, but the voice on the line was a man yelling that she was dead. Now, Daniel says he didn't even recognize the voice as Francisco's, and he didn't really know him super well. Like, Daniel might have seen him around, but they'd never spoken. He didn't really even know his name. He said that he didn't even connect the voice to him until they met at the Gatlifs that evening.
So if they didn't even know each other, then why did Francisco even reach out to him?
Daniel says he doesn't know. But Francisco was obviously aware of him because that night he pulled Daniel aside and asked if they could talk privately in Daniel's car. Even asked him to turn off his police radio. Daniel says Francisco told him that Heidi really cared about him, like him being Daniel, and then immediately asked, had she ever talked about Francisco or said anything about their relationship? And Daniel's like, no, like I don't remember her mentioning anything. Now, eventually, Francisco got out of the car. Daniel says that he watched him go into the Gatlif's house, which struck him as odd because it was still an active crime scene. And then when he came out, he stood in the driveway and in full view of officers and mourners, urinated in the yard.
I'm sorry, what?
I know, it's like, it's just weird behavior.
Yeah.
Now, Daniel says that he feels awful because he didn't realize how much Heidi was struggling. And he also tells Janice that he thinks Heidi and Francisco were involved in some way. Now, when we recently spoke to Daniel, he said that he didn't realize what was happening at the time, that all the ride-alongs and contact Heidi had with Francisco went beyond what he had believed he approved. Like, he'd been running the post for a couple of years and says that he only ever authorized a handful of ride-alongs, including one for Heidi. And the way that he tells it, they were tightly controlled. For 18 and up explorers only, paired with another student and assigned to a short list of approved officers. But there was an earlier incident that stuck out. Daniel says that sometime around the spring of 2015, another explorer mentioned that Heidi went on a ride-along that he hadn't approved, out of uniform and outside of the normal process. As post advisor, Daniel should have filed a report, but he says that it didn't seem like a concern or a complaint, more like a misunderstanding. So instead of documenting it, he talked to his supervisors, gave the group a refresher on the policy, and pulled the 18 and overs aside to remind them. He wanted all ride-alongs to have his approval, and anyone using a police radio had to be logged with dispatch so that the department could know who was where. But he also told us that it felt complicated to him. Like, Heidi was technically an adult, and he didn't think that he could dictate what she did on her own. So maybe out of all of this guilt he's feeling or his own grief, whatever, he says that he's trying to be there for her family and for the explorers. And on November 3rd, again, this is the day after Heidi's death, Daniel brought a counselor in for an emergency explorers meeting. Now, he told us the department didn't help with this. Like, there wasn't protocol for handling something like traumatic like this. But there was a surprise guest that showed up, Francisco. And it didn't seem like he was there for the counseling. Daniel says that he was like asking around, trying to find out more about what had happened. And while the explorers were gathered with Daniel, there was this other group that was meeting at the home of one of Heidi's close friends named Corbin Myers. He invited their circle over so that they could try to process what happened. And while they were all together, one of the girls got an Instagram message from Francisco who wanted her to call him. And that's when Corbin's radar started going off. He knew that there had been some shady stuff happening over the past few months. So Corbin, being in the beautiful one-party state of Indiana, decided to record their conversation. And on the call, Francisco repeated much of what he told detectives. But he also talked about his last call with Heidi. He said that she told him her life was a mess and that she'd been hurting people and lying to them. And while he downplayed their relationship to police with her friends, he leaned into it, fishing, trying to find out what they knew. Corbin actually gave those recordings to police, and he also shared them with us.
I don't know how much of everything you knew about her. Did you know everything?
For the most part, yeah.
Okay, well, what I didn't know about 3 weeks ago, since we've been hanging out and stuff, and we never established, she never said anything about liking me, she never said anything about that, we were just hanging out. She told me that she was seeing 2 other guys besides me, just hanging out with 2 other guys.
What was your reaction to that?
I was pretty upset in the beginning, and I told her that we should not probably see each other, and she got really upset.
Yeah.
And then she told me that she spoke to another guy, which, do you know the two names? I don't know if do you know them?
We know who they are, yeah.
Francisco seemed especially fixated on one of those men.
She told me about him, and she said that she felt she was hurting him. And I'm not really sure what the relationship was prior to this, but she said she was hurting him.
He said he'd already compared notes with this other guy.
According to what he told me is that she was telling him that she loves him. But unfortunately, she never said those things to me except for the day that she called me. I wish you guys could tell me more. That's what I was hoping, that maybe you guys had some answers to help me.
Hang on, so Francisco admitted there was something going on between them?
Well, after they hung up, he called back.
Like, what did she say about me? Like, she considered what we had in a relationship. I heard you guys say that, but I want to know why she thought that. It wasn't something like a romantic relationship. It wasn't like that. We just hung out.
As Francisco started backtracking, Heidi's friends followed his lead.
You never said that to you guys, that I was more than just your friend?
Not as far as we know, no.
Because I wanted to know if she ever said that to you, because if she ever thought that we were more than just that. And it's not that I would be mad at anything, but she just never ever said anything to me like that. Like, hey, she never even told me she liked me. It was nothing like that. So, and I wish kind of she told you guys what she felt about me, but I guess not.
Okay.
She didn't ever say anything about me like that to you guys?
Not that we are aware of.
No.
It's not a big deal, but the reason I ask is because I'm not really sure why she called me. I spoke to the other guy that she said she's romantically involved with. I actually spoke to him yesterday, and we kind of talked, and I don't really know what she was telling him and what she was telling me, but I just wanted to make sure that I wanted to see if that's what she meant when you said relationship, if she thought that I was more than just her friend, like someone she hangs out with.
Now, obviously, Corbin goes to Heidi's parents with these calls. And
By the way, just a side note, I love these kids. Corbin and his friends sounded better on those calls than some seasoned investigators that I've heard.
I know. I will send you the whole call because honestly, like, these guys are chef's kiss.
Yeah.
Like, they sound like crime junkies who have been taking notes since birth, and they do not come to play. So anyways, Heidi's parents, like, get these recorded calls. They already have Daniel in their ear talking about Francisco, but they didn't need him to turn them against the guy. Between the way he unraveled the day that Heidi died, his whole demeanor, and now Corbin telling them about the calls, like, they are sure something is up.
So during this time, is Francisco in contact with Mike and Janice?
Tries to be at first, but he's not admitting to any inappropriate relationship with Heidi. And actually, while you have Daniel bad-mouthing Francisco, Francisco is bad-mouthing Daniel, telling Janice that the Explorer program should have been shut down, that under Daniel's leadership, the teens were barely supervised. And someone must have agreed with Francisco on that point, at least, because Daniel says that within a couple of weeks of Heidi's death, he was moved to a new role. Officially, on paper, it's a promotion, but to him, it felt like a punishment, even though he was told he could stay involved with the Explorers if he wanted to. But regardless of the Explorers, he still stays close with Heidi's family, even staying with them for a little bit while he and his wife are going through a divorce. He vacations with them that spring. So imagine the shock and the betrayal that they feel when they learn who the other guy in Heidi's life really was. He's another IMPD officer, and not just any officer. It was the man who ran the Explorer program, the man who lived with them and vacationed with them, Daniel Bowman. In January 2016, Daniel's wife filed for divorce. That's when he was staying with Heidi's family. But this was no amicable divorce. In May, he ends up getting arrested on more than a dozen charges tied to domestic abuse against his soon-to-be ex and family, some stemming from incidents that happened years earlier. She tells police that he had been violent and controlling, forcing her to bark like a dog, punching her, shoving her into walls, threatening her with his service weapon, even pointing it at their sleeping daughter. And she says it got worse after Heidi died, that Daniel admitted that they had been involved, and he just spiraled. She left because she feared what he would do next. So in the time between Heidi's death in November and then his arrest in May, dude had been unraveling. He moved to that different position, which again, he saw as punishment. Then his wife left him, and word was starting to spread around the station that he had a relationship with Heidi too. Now, according to Daniel, those were just rumors. He says started by Francisco and a couple of other officers. He told Nina that they were the ones who contacted his then wife and planted this idea in her head. He says that he never implied that he and Heidi were involved to his ex or to anyone else. But based on what we know Heidi told friends, they believed that she and Daniel were involved. Which again, Daniel denies. He told us he cared about Heidi as a friend and mentor, but insists that nothing between them was romantic or sexual.
Okay, but why is a grown man friends with a teenage girl in his program? I mean, she would have been like 16 when they met?
Right, which in Indiana, 16 is the age of consent.
But to be
like,
clear,
who cares?
Yeah, like still a minor. He's still in a place of authority. Like, I'm sorry.
And he's saying nothing happened. So, like, I agree. Like, he should not be friends with a 16-year-old, especially when, like you're saying, he's in a position of power. But Daniel says that he felt close to all of the older explorers, and he swears that he and Heidi were only alone twice, briefly, like, as they left meetings.
So why is Heidi telling her friends things to make them believe that he and Heidi are dating?
Daniel told us that he's not sure what gave her that impression. Maybe she misread his goofing around, something he says he did with everyone.
But if you're goofing around as a supervisory officer gives a minor in your care the impression that she has a relationship with you,
that's like the bigger problem, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you're the problem.
Preach.
And I guarantee that the goofing around that's happening is highly inappropriate.
Mm-hmm. Either way, Daniel basically blames Francisco and the other cops for all of this. He says he documented what was happening, and when he learned that one of the initial detectives working Heidi's case might have ties to Francisco, he sends this memo up the chain. He saw himself as the good guy, and we know that because of text messages that he sent his wife, texts that would later become part of the probable cause affidavit for his domestic violence arrest. On April 6, 2016, he texted her, quote, "I'll be a hero, a whistleblower, fighting police corruption. And if not, I have nothing to lose. You've taken everything I've ever worked for. He took my only friend," end quote. And then on May 9th, 2016, he says, quote, "Right now, I'm only interested in going to," there's another cop's name that I'm not going to say, "and Olmos, and putting a bullet in their heads. I'm furious. This department failed. This city needs more dead cops," end quote. Those messages are a big reason that his wife contacted police. His communications were becoming more threatening. And those I got straight from a legal document, but Daniel told us that he didn't write them.
Of course. Then please, Daniel, who did?
He blames his now ex, or someone close to her says that she had access to his iMac and she could have sent them. That's his story.
Okay.
Anyway, after Daniel's arrest, he posts bond and goes home on electric monitoring to await trial for the domestic violence charges. And still, at this point, nothing had happened with Heidi's case or with Francisco or the Explorer's program, because they still have not been able to get into Heidi's phone. It isn't until fall 2017, when new technology becomes available, that they can finally crack it. And what they find makes it clear why Francisco wouldn't want them to see their communications. It shows just how manipulative he had been and how much they had been in contact. All told, they exchanged over 300 calls in the month and a half, just the month and a half before her death, and 177 texts in the final 3 days. Now, I haven't seen most of them. This is a closed case with IMPD, but they're still withholding most of the records, including a lot of the texts. And listen, we've worked with a lot of agencies over the years. IMPD has consistently been one of the hardest to get records from. And when I say hardest, I do mean impossible, which I hate to say about the agency that's in my own backyard.
Yeah.
But I have way better relationships with other agencies. Like, why the F does it need to be so hard here? Like, what are we hiding something?
Right. Like, my mind goes to, like, why not?
But of the messages I can see, including some from a probable cause affidavit, Francisco's tone goes from like flirty to furious. He berates her for lying and gaslights her about this other officer and demands to know where they stand. They end up talking 3 times on the day that she died. And after the last call, he flooded her with messages, texting things like, "You can't do this to me. You can't. I'm headed to your house right now. And you're going to make me look so stupid in front of your family. You make me feel like this is really all my fault." And the one thing that's more interesting than the texts is the data showing that all of those messages between Francisco and Heidi were deleted around the time that he used her phone to call Daniel. And after the messages were wiped, that is when the phone was locked. So that November, more than 2 years after Heidi's death, Francisco is arrested for felony obstruction of justice and misdemeanor computer trespass. Both him and Daniel are off the force, suspended without pay, facing termination as their cases begin to crawl through the court system.
So I'm kind of getting lost on like what the truth is or was. Like, was Heidi involved with Daniel or Francisco or both?
So based on everything that we've learned from court records, from everyone we spoke to who had direct knowledge of the situation, it appears that Heidi was involved with both men. And that kind of dynamic, like one teen, multiple officers, is sadly not unusual. I mean, it really underscores how predatory some of the adults in these programs can be.
And did police find any texts between Heidi and Daniel when they got into her phone?
So here's what's interesting. I don't know where they find them, his phone, her phone, whatever, but I know that they find texts. However, they don't actually charge him with anything related to Heidi, and those texts never make it into any record that we have access to.
And IMPD won't share records.
Yeah, right. So in August of 2018, that is when Daniel goes to trial for his domestic violence charges. Now, he gets found guilty on 8 of the 13 counts, but that's all involving his then wife, not Heidi. So the only way I know that there were messages between him and Heidi that seem suspicious is because of what happens next. So in February of 2019, he gets deposed for Francisco's case. And the prosecutor presses him on Heidi, reading their texts aloud and basically saying that she thinks he's lying about the nature of their relationship. But his attorney jumps in and shuts it down, arguing that it could expose him to new charges and that is not relevant to Francisco's case.
Okay. If those texts could open him up to new charges, and the prosecutor has those texts, I hate to ask this question, but what are we doing here?
Dude, I don't know. I don't, because I don't know what's in them.
I mean, maybe they knew they could only prove the DV charges and figured he'd get like a long enough sentence for those that they wouldn't have to worry. Okay.
Yeah, no, about that. So according to Indianapolis Star reporter Mark Alicia, at Daniel's sentencing, the judge says that she thinks he has a dark side, but also says that his police background makes prison more dangerous for him. So the judge considered it an extenuating circumstance, but still sentences him to 8 years plus 4 years probation.
That's something, at least.
But hang on. He wasn't in prison long before his lawyer asked for home detention, arguing that he wasn't safe behind bars. I guess the defense did some research, found out that the judge had the option to offer home detention, and that Daniel, basically they're like, he has a job, he has a house, he has a baby on the way with his new wife. Oh, by the way, he has a new wife. He has older kids who depend on his paycheck. Prosecutors obviously objected, but a different judge okayed it. And after less than 4 months, Daniel was released on electronic monitoring. So he finishes the sentence in 2022. And since then, he has rebuilt his image in academia, branding himself as an advocate for justice-impacted students working in a university lab that studies criminal, legal, and social systems, and he's pursuing a PhD. To this day, Daniel insists that the judge got it wrong. He denies everything, the abuse, the texts, the threats, any inappropriate relationship with Heidi.
I mean, people don't usually get paroled without admitting guilt. And Daniel clearly hasn't. So I know it's not quite parole, but why did he get to sit at home through all that?
Dude, I wish I knew. The Marion County Prosecutor's Office told us that the lenient outcome was unusual, and they don't seem to know why he got it.
And what happened to Francisco?
So in 2022, Francisco almost pleaded guilty to a reduced misdemeanor obstruction of justice. He gets a year of probation, 240 hours of community service, and is ordered to submit weekly journal entries to the court.
Wait, just hold on. There are no police officers in trouble for having a relationship with a minor in the Police Explorer program.
Well, since we couldn't get records from IMPD, I don't know if they even explored that angle. Heidi was a minor when she entered the program, but she was 18 when she died. And the only texts that we've seen are from when she was 18.
So what are we supposed to take that to mean? IMPD is just cool with allegations of officers grooming minors?
Till they turn 18, right?
Like they're cool with the power dynamic of an officer having a relationship with someone in their program as long as they're 18? I mean, there were at least internal affairs investigations in the Sandra Birchmore case. That's something.
Well, I mean, remember, IMPD did add a policy this year,
right?
2025.
Heidi
happened
recently.
In 2015. 10 years later, they added a policy this year saying they weren't cool with it.
Oh, good.
But what is maddening to me is that more than a decade after Heidi's death, so much is still unclear. What did IMPD know and when?
Right.
It's obvious that someone in leadership saw something, at least with Francisco, because Janice told us that apparently in the spring of 2015, so this is months before Heidi died, a high-ranking official pulled her aside and said that they were concerned Heidi was riding with the same male officer a little too often. He suggested that she, maybe mix it up, ride with some different officers. Now, Janice doesn't remember if he named Francisco specifically, but she knew that's who he meant since Heidi often did ride-alongs with him. So she and Mike told Heidi, switch it up. They assumed she did.
So they were worried enough to tell her mom, but not to actually do anything themselves.
We don't know what they did.
Right.
Meanwhile, despite what Daniel told us, that he was in the dark about Heidi's frequently tagging along with Francisco on patrol, after she died, he told her mom that everyone knew that they were going on too many ride-alongs. Mike and Janice still don't feel like they got the full story, and they feel betrayed, knowing that two men who were supposed to protect Heidi failed her, and those guys walked away with barely any consequences. Now, our team has spent the better part of a year trying to find out more. We filed multiple requests with IMPD, and we got back a few records and vague assurances that they're working on getting us more. And at the same time, they claim that they're withholding some under an investigatory exemption, but they haven't said what or why, considering both criminal cases are closed.
Right.
And they also declined an interview, saying that the answers are, wait for it, in the records.
The records that they won't give us.
Them the ones.
Okay, so we're just in this little circle.
Yeah. Now, we couldn't reach Francisco, and neither he nor Daniel has ever publicly admitted to anything beyond a friendship with Heidi. But the general feeling from people we spoke to, family, friends, people in the mix, is that both crossed a line, and they put Heidi in the middle, pressuring her to choose between them. And that toxic triangle dynamic isn't just our interpretation either. We spoke to John Moore, who is a former sergeant with the Special Investigations Unit at IMPD. He worked the case against Daniel. He told us that investigators' broader takeaway was that Heidi was in an inappropriate relationship involving both men, and that they both groomed her, using their authority and access as officers to build her trust and blur the boundaries. Court files have some details, but not enough to show how closely investigators looked at either of them. We don't know how seriously they checked out Daniel's relationship with Heidi or how deeply they dug into Francisco beyond the obstruction case. Between the delays and the denials and the no comments, IMPD has made it nearly impossible to understand what really happened. And instead of answers, we got stonewalled. We don't even know how IMPD supervised the Explorer post. But if Daniel's account is accurate, he ran it mostly on his own. There were about 30 teens on the roster, maybe 10 regulars, and he was the only sworn officer directly involved. There was a sergeant who offered light oversight and a few adult volunteers that helped out, including former explorers. And when Daniel took over, he was a patrol officer with zero youth experience. He basically says that he was handed the post with a "here you go" and no manual, just learning for life handouts and IMPD's general orders, which he kind of cobbled together into a rule book. And by the way, just as a reminder, Learning for Life is the organization that most Explorer programs in the country run through.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned, Learning for Life is an affiliate of Scouting
America.
Yeah, aka the Boy Scouts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've ever heard of any abuse problems with them.
Right.
But quick download. In 2020, the Boy Scouts filed for bankruptcy after being hit with over, wait for it, 82,000 sexual abuse claims, one of the largest abuse scandals in U.S. history. The organization had known about the abuse for decades, keeping internal records commonly known as the perversion files, but often failing to report abusers to authorities. So all that to say, I bet you would be surprised to know that in 2015, Learning for Life still had no guidance on adult communication with teens outside of meetings. No policy on texting. Now, that same year, the Boy Scouts adopted a digital version of what they call too deep leadership, meaning that no one-on-one contact between adults and minors, including through texting, DMs, or gaming. But Learning for Life has its own handbook, and the digital contact rule wasn't included that year, and we couldn't find it in there until 2017. So to me, this isn't just an Indianapolis problem. These programs seem to be built in a way that makes them prime for grooming. And the failures we're seeing here are happening in agencies all over the country. And there's no national public database for Explorer misconduct. I mean, we know sexual abuse in general is notoriously underreported. But there have been reporters and researchers who tried to pin down how widespread this problem is. A recent investigation by Lakedra Travis of the Marshall Project identified at least 217 abuse and misconduct allegations in law enforcement Explorer programs going back to the 1970s when girls were first allowed in, spanning more than 100 agencies, with officers grooming or sexually abusing victims as young as 13 or 14. A 2003 study by criminologists Samuel Walker and Don Earlbeck found that nearly half of all reported cases of officer sexual misconduct with teenagers happened in Explorer posts. So even though these programs are just one way that cops interact with teens, they account for a disproportionate share of the known abuse. And while girls are more often targeted, boys and young men have been victimized too. Now, supporters of the programs point out that these cases are rare, a small fraction of the tens of thousands of teens who have participated since 1959, when a California Sheriff's Department started the very first post. And listen, for sure, when operated properly, Explorer programs can offer real value. Participants, usually 14 to 20, get early exposure to police work while building leadership, discipline, confidence, a sense of belonging. Agencies get a recruitment pipeline, a way to connect with the community. It should be a win-win.
Right.
So how do we get the good without putting children at risk? The answer is oversight. For posts under Learning for Life, the organization is supposed to set and enforce protection rules with a 5-point safety plan. Screen out abusers, educate youth, parents, and volunteers about warning signs, set boundaries, encourage reporting, remove offenders. In practice, every safeguard lives or dies at the local level. And as then freelance journalist Jonathan Kaminsky found, historically, Learning for Life has mostly left agencies to police themselves. And inside that shaky setup is a glaring vulnerability. Ride-alongs, the program's most popular feature and its riskiest. California-based attorney Anthony DeMarco, who has spent years litigating Explorer abuse cases, told us that ride-alongs are a perfect setup for exploitation. Hours alone with a powerful adult, with no one else able to see or hear what's happening, and almost no real oversight from the department.
But doesn't that too deep leadership rule apply?
everywhere except ride-alongs. At least they were the exception until just this past June, when Learning for Life finally started requiring 2 adults in the car if the Explorer is under 18. Before that, the loophole was wide open. And the Marshall Project concluded that ride-alongs factored into about a quarter of abuse cases. But ride-alongs are only part of it. These programs are a perfect storm because they stack all these risk factors together. Officers get access to teens, oversight is often thin, and the kids want to be there. They're ambitious, they want to impress. A lot of them see this as their future. And the structure can make it hard to tell where normal training ends and something sketchy begins. So when an officer singles them out with extra attention,
It can feel important.
it's their big break instead of feeling like a red flag. That's how grooming usually starts here, not with threats, but with connection. An officer becomes a confidant, builds trust, maybe gets close to the family. And that's just as true when the teen is legally an adult like Heidi. A birthday does not erase the power imbalance. And from there, things can escalate, right? It's a ride home, a private hangout, late night messages. By the time that it's clearly sexual or coercive, the teen might actually feel like they went along with it, or that speaking up would ruin everything, their reputation, their shot at the job, their future. Anthony says that there is often this unspoken deal. Stay quiet, and the doors stay open. Speak up, and it slams shut. And victims might also be afraid, by the way.
They're cops.
These are cops, yes. They carry weapons. They can arrest you. A lot of victims worry that they'll be targeted or that no one is going to believe them. So many of them never even tell. Some of them come forward years later. And even when they do, there's no guarantee that they're going to get justice. And this isn't just a stat. So I did a bit of a call out about the Explorer program, if you remember, in our episode on Peggy Hetrick. And not too long ago, I posted a TikTok asking people to share their stories with me if they were in the program. Didn't say what kind of stories, just left it open. And the number of messages I got from people was wild. So many of them had stories from their past where either they had friends that were in intimate relationships with officers or they themselves were groomed. And tons of them still didn't want to come forward even now. So the problem is so much bigger than we think it is. But there were some people who decided to share their story in hopes that it could save even one more young person from abuse. And one of those people was a 43-year-old woman who I'll call Kate. In 1998, then 15-year-old Kate joined the Boscawen Police Explorer program in New Hampshire. She'd grown up admiring a DARE officer and knew that she wanted to be a cop. The post seemed like the perfect first step. A small group of teens led by Officer John LaRoche, who was in his late 20s. And John's mom had been a teacher of Kate, so he already felt safe. And he knew how badly she wanted this career. And he knew that she was vulnerable. As a preteen, she'd questioned her sexuality. Her parents eventually came around, but for a while, they restricted what she could do. She felt really cut off. And John acted like the one adult who accepted her no matter what. As the Explorer advisor, he controlled everything. The program included regular ride-alongs, sometimes overnight shifts, and Kate was often paired with him. And her parents were fine with it. They trusted him and supported her goals. But it didn't take long for him to start just pushing boundaries. Within months, she said that he was steering conversations toward sex, making crude jokes, asking her about her experiences, and oversharing his own, including that he cheated on his wife. Now, at first, Kate didn't see it as wrong. It felt like he was treating her like an equal. She actually felt special. But sometime around early 2000, Kate says that he assaulted her. It happened in this dark, secluded lot near the county jail, this boat launch that he routinely checked while on patrol. And she tells us that one night he drove there, made a comment about people having sex there, and then told her to get out of the car and perform oral sex on him. And she said she didn't feel like she had a choice. She was a teenage girl alone with an armed officer, afraid of his reaction, afraid of ruining her future, so she complied. Kate told us that there were more assaults in the months that followed, all while he was on duty. At one point, she says that John even showed her a news article about another cop getting arrested for assaulting an explorer. He then pulled out the New Hampshire Criminal Code and read her the exact statute, the one that described what he was doing as felonious sexual assault. Like, Kate didn't want to anger him, so she tried to reassure him, like she was over 16, the age of consent in New Hampshire. But he corrected her. If the adult is in a position of authority, the law is actually 18.
So he absolutely knew what he was doing.
And he made sure Kate knew too. And after that, she changed. She became this shadow of the fun-loving kid that her friends knew. She tried to tell another explorer what was happening, but instead of support, she got shamed. So she stayed in the post for a couple more years. It did open doors for her, like she graduated high school early, she got into a criminal justice program, even landed a civilian job with another police department. But the trauma followed her. She was convinced that she led him on, that she didn't deserve happiness. And eventually she gave up her dream of becoming a cop. Now, years passed, Kate got married, and in 2013, she had a daughter. And there was something about becoming a parent that made her finally see things differently. And she knew that she'd want someone to be held accountable if they did this to her child. So in September of 2014, after a lot of soul searching, she actually reported John. He was long gone from Boscawen by then. He was actually chief of police in nearby Canterbury at that time.
Great.
But since he and the Boscawen chief had worked together, the case was handed over to the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. Investigators asked Kate to wear a wire and confront him. And listen, she hadn't seen him in ages, and the prospect of this was overwhelming, but she agreed, and she goes to meet him at the Canterbury station. And on tape, they have this guy admitting to the sexual activity, even apologizing, though he was insisting it was consensual. And later, when investigators confronted him again, he repeated the confession. And according to WMUR's Heather Hamill, he even said that he thought it was, quote, fun to flirt with a 16-year-old under his control.
What?
In August 2015, John was arrested for aggravated felonious sexual assault and placed on unpaid leave. And news coverage shows that he was indicted on a slew of felony and misdemeanor sexual assault charges a couple of months later. Then he resigned the following January. By summer of 2016, the case went to trial. He actually took the stand where, again, he admits to the sexual encounters with Kate, but is still claiming they were consensual.
How can he call it consensual when the law literally says it wasn't? And also, he pointed out that law.
Literally, that's what prosecutors argued, that the whole thing was grooming and coercion. They brought in an expert on trauma and pressed him on his changing stories. But John's defense painted him as this bumbling and harmless guy and suggested that Kate had financial motive to go after him. 2 former explorers testified that she had, quote, bragged about the relationship. And so after 7 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 2 hours, and they found him not guilty on all charges. I know.
In what world was he not in a position of authority?
It's baffling.
This is unreal.
According to Kate, prosecutors later asked jurors what shaped their decision. And they said they just couldn't picture John being a violent guy. And they questioned why she would stay in the program. Some people thought she cried too much. Some people thought she didn't cry enough, or that she seemed just too strong.
So it didn't matter what she did or was going to do. It was the wrong reaction. She was never going to make herself the perfect victim for them.
Which is what we see all the time, right? Survivors are held to impossible standards. They're expected to fit this narrow script, be composed, but not too composed. Remember every detail, even though trauma distorts memory. And if they don't match what people think a real victim, quote unquote, looks like, they're not believed. Kate was crushed. The Attorney General's office encouraged her to file a civil suit. Some survivors pursue that even when criminal charges don't stick. But she just couldn't stomach another courtroom. The public backlash was already intense, and she worried that suing would make people dismiss her story, think it was just about money, so she decided against it. The upside is that John LaRoche is no longer a cop. And after he was suspended, locals raised broader concerns about Canterbury PD. So the sheriff's office reviewed the department, and they actually found over a decade of mismanagement and dysfunction under his leadership. Now, we reached out to John via text. He told us that there was nothing to discuss since he was found not guilty. And when we noted that he still admitted to sexual contact with a minor explorer and asked if he had anything to say now, nearly a decade later, He said that he'd already answered for it at trial and told us to lose his number. No one at Boscawen PD today was around during John's time or the Explorer era, but the chief told us that the program was shut down long before John's arrest and that no other complaints were ever reported. Speaking out even now still feels risky to Kate, emotionally and legally. Like, we're using a pseudonym, but that's not gonna hide her identity from him or the community. But she decided it was worth it. Silence hadn't protected her. It only protected him, and she wants people to know what happened. And she hopes that her story helps someone else get justice, even though she didn't. And Kate's not alone in that hope, or even that outcome. For many survivors, justice stays just out of reach. The Marshall Project found that only about half of the Explorer-related cases that they tracked led to any time behind bars. Big reason is because of plea deals. Charges just get reduced to misdemeanors or to non-sex offenses. Beyond Explorer Post, a Washington Post investigation found that nearly 40% of officers convicted of sex crimes involving children from 2005 to 2022 never served a day in prison. And when there is punishment, there is no real standard of what that is. Charges fall under this mix of state and federal laws, statutory rape, abuse of power, civil rights violations. Prosecutors don't always use the same playbook, even when the behavior looks similar. And so sentencing is all over the place.
Right.
Inside agencies, discipline is just as inconsistent. Some officers are fired, some resign, others stay on the job with reprimand or short suspension, or sometimes nothing at all. And that's what happened in Jennifer's case. In the late 80s, Jennifer joined the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Explorer program in California after hearing about it at school. She was 15 and already set on a career in law enforcement. And this post was smaller, fewer than 10 teens, and run entirely by one deputy who we're going to call Bill. Bill, who was in his mid to late 30s, started inviting Jennifer on overnight ride-alongs a couple of times a week. Her parents are fine with it. She was with a cop, what could be safer? And over the next couple of years, he slowly introduced her to inappropriate behavior, things like telling her how beautiful that she was going to be when she grew up. She trusted him, believed what he said, and valued his opinion. She idolized this man. So when one night he turned around in the patrol car and kissed her, she was stunned, but also flattered. A month later, he took her to his house while his wife was away and pressured her to have sex. Now, she said no, and he stopped that time. Now, soon after, her family moved to Florida. And before leaving, she confided in another explorer. Not as a cry for help like Kate, more like she was mourning the end of something that she thought was real. In her mind, what they had been a relationship. That explorer told the sheriff's office. And to their credit, they opened an investigation. But by then, Jennifer was across the country. So everything was happening over the phone with her, but only with her.
What do you mean only her? They didn't talk to her parents?
They had no idea that
even though she was still a minor.
Yeah, it's wild. And in that moment, since Jennifer was so embarrassed, she minimized it. But she did at least confirm that they kissed and that the relationship was inappropriate. The sheriff's office didn't respond to our interview request. But as far as we know, the investigation went nowhere. Bill didn't lose his badge. Records show that he did step down as Explorer Advisor in 1991, but he stayed on the job for nearly 2 more decades. Jennifer joined another Explorer post in Florida, this one larger and more structured. But the same problems persisted. She remembers the comments, the lingering attention from male cops of all ages. At the time, when she's young, it didn't feel predatory. It felt like being noticed. She went through the academy, worked as a dispatcher, and became a reserve officer. But the steady boundary pushing wore her down. And eventually she realized these are not superheroes. They are just human men in uniforms, some good, some not. So when she got pregnant, she left the field. Last year, while flipping through an old photo album, Jennifer decided that she actually wanted to confront Bill. But that's when she found out that he died. So there would be no reckoning, no chance to look him in the eye and tell him what he'd done to her. And she carried shame for years, blaming herself. And only later did she understand how vulnerable teens are and how men like Bill take advantage of that. Heidi, Kate, Jennifer, and so many others, they did what adults told them to do. They trusted the people in charge, and so did their parents. I mean, go back to Heidi. Take Mike and Janice Gatliff. They were so involved. It's not like they just dropped Heidi off and hoped for the best. Mike went to her first meeting. They showed up to events. But they were also trusting the system and thought that Heidi was surrounded by honorable cops worthy of their powerful positions. You know, they still believe the law enforcement explorer programs can work if there's real oversight and accountability. But they don't think Heidi got that. And they have to live with the ache of knowing that they'll never see her huge smile or hear her contagious laugh again. She'll never wear the badge that she worked so hard for, pouring nearly 2,000 hours into the Explorers. So what they hold on to now is their faith and their memories. The way that Heidi could turn everything into a joke. The moment that she made a quiet child in Haiti smile during a missions trip just by refusing to give up. They know that Heidi changed lives simply by being who she was. And her compassion and her drive and her goofy sense of humor all came from one place. A heart that was wired to show up for others.
So in all of this, I have to ask, does IMPD still have its program?
When Detective Christine Menina took over after Daniel Bowman, she told us that it was basically a free-for-all. Like, teens tried to outrank her and like boss her around. So back then she came in, she set new rules, tightened boundaries. Some of the kids left, most of them stayed. And she ran the program for like 5 years before she retired. And to answer your question, no, they don't have an Explorer program now. They have something called Junior Cadets, but as of late October, IMPD told us no one was enrolled in that. So whether that's a fresh start or just a rebrand remains to be seen. Because a new name doesn't mean new safeguards. And those safeguards are what's necessary, because this isn't just about a few bad apples.
Right.
This is, I keep saying it, about a system that allowed them to operate, policies that left massive gaps, higher-ups that looked the other way or downplayed allegations, and a culture that protected the institution first and the kids last. And girl, this isn't even a new problem. Like,
Right.
F the stats, this has been a systemic issue for decades. Like, I don't know if you knew this, but in the 70s, the Los Angeles Police Department found itself under investigation after some officers were discovered taking overnight camping trips with teenage girls from the department's all-female Explorer post. And one of the girls described these camping trips as, quote, little more than orgies. According to reporting, it had been happening for like a couple of years before an Explorer finally sounded the alarm. In that case, some officers were charged, but news coverage shows that most of the cases just collapsed. Prosecutors cited a lack of evidence and victim cooperation. In some cases, they say they couldn't prove that the officers knew that the girls were underage. I guess it was too much detective work for them to like figure out that the girls in a youth program were youths. Yeah. And department discipline was also weak. Like, a few resigned, a few were suspended, one was fired, one got a disability pension for injuries and emotional stress. Others were cleared. And then, like, by the late 70s, the whole thing just like fizzled out in the media. According to Jonathan Kaminsky's reporting, it had been happening for a couple of years before the Explorer sounded the alarm. It doesn't have to be this way. Some groups are doing it right, like the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office Law Enforcement Youth Cadet Program in New York. Their advisor, Sergeant Alonzo Montana, has built guardrails into every part of it. Communication runs through tracked group platforms. Parents are looped in early and often, and historically, they haven't even allowed ride-alongs at all. When Nina spoke with Sergeant Montana earlier this year, they were just starting to phase them in with very strict rules. And we spoke to a woman named Dawn Boley in Wisconsin. She says that she joined her local Explorer post in the early 1980s when she was a freshman in high school. She learned skills like conflict resolution, emergency response, even firearms training. She loved her program leaders and says that they changed her life and the lives of others in the program. For Dawn, it wasn't just a resume builder, it was formative. It showed her how to stay calm under pressure and that being a cop wasn't the path for her at all.
So it's not the explorers that need to stop.
Yes.
As usual, it's just the abuse.
Yes. But any meaningful change has to start with the agencies running these programs. They're the ones with the power and the obligation to enforce the rules.
The responsibility.
Yeah, and my God, be thoughtful about who you put in charge. Don't just grab whoever's free and hand them a group of teenagers. I mean, like, right now, the qualification advisors have to be at least 21, pass a background check, and get agency approval and then be signed off by the local exploring council.
And do they go through any, serious safety training?
Not really. So beyond the background check, the training they have to do is pretty much just online webinars. And actually, Nina, when she was doing all the reporting on this, she took them and earned the same safety certification that advisors get while sitting on her couch in one night.
Salute to Nina.
Salute to Nina. Now, the recent ride-along policy change by Learning for Life, which, by the way, never responded to our interview requests, is a step in the right direction. But rules on paper are the easy part.
Mm-hmm.
We still don't know how or how often that policy is enforced or what actually happens to agencies that ignore it. That attorney I mentioned, Anthony DeMarco, sees the problem as systemic. Officers are given unsupervised access to minors, then protected by a culture and union contracts that often shield them from serious consequences, even when there is misconduct. Mm-hmm. His view is, don't just slap a Band-Aid on the problem.
Right.
Make it as transparent and accountable from the ground up, starting with ride-alongs. So, what can we do?
Right.
Here you go. I love to leave you with a good takeaway. So if you're a parent, an agency, or a teenager in the program, I got you covered. So agencies. Define inappropriate conduct clearly, things like shoulder rubs or oversharing, and act early with serious discipline or termination before it escalates. Make ride-along assignments random so officers can't quietly handpick the same teens over and over. Use tech, like interior audio and video in patrol cars, GPS tracking, maybe even like an Uber-style recording that kicks in for every ride. The thing is, Anthony thinks that there would be a lot of pushback on that idea from cops and explorers.
Okay.
But who cares? In my
Yeah.
mind, if it protects even one kid, it's worth the discomfort. Now, parents, if your child wants to join an Explorer Cadet program, do not assume uniforms mean it's safe. Treat it the way you would a new school or a daycare when your kids were little. Ask who runs the post. What are the rules? How are ride-alongs tracked? What's the policy on texting and social media? How are complaints handled? Stay involved, show up, talk to advisors, connect with other parents. The more visible you are, the easier it is for your kid to speak up if something feels off. And keep the conversation going at home. Talk about boundaries. Make sure your kid knows that they can come to you if an adult, even if it's someone in uniform,
Especially someone in uniform.
if they make them uncomfortable. Remind them that abuse is never their fault, and if they disclose it, go straight to the authorities. If local law enforcement shrugs it off or you're concerned about a conflict of interest, go above them to state or federal agencies. And for my youths listening, explorers or no explorers, you guys are faced with crazy all the time. I wanted to be 20 when I was 8, and I was dying for someone to look at me like I was older and mature. And some people will do that with respect. They're going to give you responsibility and the room to come into your own. But others are going to try and take advantage. I didn't know what the signs were when I was young. So let me talk to you like the grown-up you are. You are not an idiot. So if you feel like a line is being crossed, you get that tingling in your spine or that jelly in your belly, you know something is off. You do not have to justify it. You don't have to excuse it away. It's not your responsibility to make adults feel comfortable. And you do not have to protect them from their own actions. And if you realize it too late, no, you didn't. It is never too late to draw the line and stop unwanted behavior. And it is never your fault. Doesn't matter if it's a cop or your pastor or a teacher or a coach. Whether it's an Explorer program or somewhere else, you don't owe anyone your time, attention, or access. If an officer asks to meet alone or sends flirty, secretive messages or just gives you a bad feeling, tell someone you trust. And if something already happened, you are not to blame. Even if you didn't or couldn't say no in the moment, even if it felt like something you agreed to, power dynamics can twist what feels like a choice. And you deserve support no matter what. So Crime Junkies, if any part of this episode hit home, if you know someone who's been affected by abuse in any youth setting, or you just want those spaces to be safer, talk about this, share this episode. We can do better. We have to. For Heidi and Kate and Jennifer, and for the next teenager who walks into an Explorer post with the dreams of one day wearing a badge. If you or someone you know is struggling or has experienced abuse, help is available. We're going to link resources in our show notes, including hotlines for sexual assault, child abuse, domestic violence, and suicide prevention. Please reach out if you need to or share them with someone who might. As always, you can find all the source material for this episode on our website, crimejunkie.com. And if you want to listen to more episodes like this and all of our episodes completely ad-free, be sure to join our fan club. You'll also get early access to new episodes every week and bonus content every month.
And you can follow us on Instagram at Crime Junkie Podcast.
We'll see you next episode.
Human beings are peculiar creatures. They kill for the most pathetic, microscopic reasons you can imagine. Convinced that their secrets are buried deep, when in reality, they're standing right in the open, waiting for someone to finally see them. I am Lieutenant Joe Kenda, and I have seen the darkest corners of the human heart. I tell you, it is a place where empathy goes to die. Consider the case of Brittany McGlone, 19 years old, a life just beginning to bloom, cut down by the sheer arrogance of a monster who thought he could simply wash the evidence away and move on with his miserable existence. It was May the 4th, 2007, Winsboro, Texas. A place where everyone thinks they know their neighbor, but my, they do not have a clue. Brittany was working 2 jobs, saving every penny for nursing school. That is a woman of character. She had a plan, a future. Her boyfriend, Jeff Stogner, claimed he left that morning to pick up his grandmother. He said he left Brittany sleeping in his bed. When he returned, he claimed he found her dead. A horrific discovery, indeed. The scene was staged, yet clumsy. Blood everywhere. A blunt force trauma that would make your stomach turn. The weapon? Never found. A tire iron or a crowbar, they suspected. The killer cleaned up, had the audacity to take a shower in the house while she lay there, cooling in the bed. That level of composure, that absolute lack of humanity, that is the calling card of a predator. You have to be kidding me if you think this was some random act of violence. This was intimate. It was personal. The circle of people who knew she was at that house was tight. Too tight. It screams of a secret being protected, of a monster operating in plain sight. The initial investigation was a circus of missed opportunities and half-truths. They looked at the boyfriend, Jeff. They looked at the grandfather, a man with a dark history of abuse that made your skin crawl. Every one of them had an alibi that seemed to hold just enough water to keep them out of handcuffs, at least for a while. But then, the name Chad Carr surfaced. Chad Carr, a 25-year-old man dating the boyfriend's younger sister. A man with a history of violence that mirrors the very nature of this murder. Years prior, he had attacked a woman with a jackhandle. The exact same kind of weapon used on Brittany. The parallels are chilling, aren't they? He had the motive, he had the opportunity, and when he finally spoke to the detectives, his story was a web of contradictions that could not hide the rot beneath. He tried to establish an alibi, but his timeline was a disaster. He was late, he was inconsistent, and he was sweating through his own lies. He was shaking, nervous, and later, the girlfriend, Velva, remembered the smell of the very body wash used in the home where Brittany died. A detail that should have been the final nail in the coffin. Yet the wheels of justice grind so slowly, they can sometimes stop altogether. The tragedy here is not just the murder. It is the institutional failure. They had a suspect, they had a pattern, and yet for years the case languished in the cold. It took until 2022 for the authorities to finally arrest Chad Carr for capital murder. And what happened? A grand jury, failing to see the full picture because the testimony was not presented correctly, returned a no bill. He walked free. Can you imagine the frustration of a family that has been waiting nearly 2 decades for a modicum of peace? The evil here is not complex. It is simple, cold-blooded aggression. It is a man who saw a woman, saw a secret, and decided that his own skin was worth more than her entire future. They say the truth is easy to find in a small town. I say the truth is the most expensive commodity in the world, and sometimes you simply cannot afford the cost of uncovering it. My, it is enough to make you lose faith in everything if you let it. But we do not. We keep looking. Because Brittany McGlone deserves the truth, and the monster, no matter how long he hides, is never truly free. He is just waiting for the day his own shadow catches up to him. And I tell you, that day always comes. Human beings are strange creatures. They kill for the most trivial reasons you could ever imagine. But sometimes, the most disturbing thing is not the act of killing itself, but the silence that follows. The absolute, cold-blooded apathy of those sworn to protect. You have to be kidding me. I tell you, incompetence is a far more common killer than any knife or bullet. My. You're looking at a case where the system did not just drop the ball. They threw it into the trash before the game had even started. Spencer Irwin, 30 years old, a man who reached out to help the broken, only to end up broken himself, discarded like refuse in a loading dock. In the year 2024, the Fresno police found him, naked, covered in dirt. And what was their immediate, brilliant conclusion? An overdose. Case closed. Nothing to see here, folks, move along. You have to be kidding me. They did not do an autopsy. They did not secure a perimeter. They did not even bother to act like detectives. They acted like janitors cleaning up a mess they could not be bothered to understand. I have spent my life walking through the shadows of human depravity. I have looked into the eyes of killers and seen nothing but a void. But this is a different kind of horror. This is the horror of the assumption. They assumed Spencer was a drug addict, and because of that label, his life had no value to them. It is the ultimate insult to the dead. Kelly, his mother, had to become the detective that the badge-wearing officials refused to be. She had to navigate the labyrinth of grief and bureaucratic nonsense, while the very people paid to find the truth were busy looking the other way. Consider the facts, if you can even call them that, in this wasteland of an investigation. Spencer was found in a state of advanced decomposition. The medical examiner, without the decency of a post-mortem examination, ruled it natural causes. Probable sudden cardiac death. Tell me, do people suddenly drop dead of natural causes in the nude? Behind a waste management facility while walking to a phone store? My. The lack of logic here is staggering. It is an insult to the intelligence of anyone with a pulse. And the scene itself? Those snow angel patterns in the dirt. Are we supposed to believe a man dying of a heart attack decides to perform gymnastics in the dust? It is pathetic. And then there is the internal battle. Spencer was a man fighting his own demons, struggling with alcohol, trying to climb out of the hole. He was not a saint, but he was a human being. The victim is always a human being, regardless of their past. They have families, they have light, and they have potential that is snuffed out by the hands of another or the indifference of the state. He was trying to get clean. He was trying to build a future. And in that, he crossed paths with people who thrived in the dark. Angel, a man of lies, caught in the web of a life that was not his. A white car, appearing like a phantom in the night, captured on a grainy camera. It is the classic anatomy of a cover-up, born not of malice perhaps, but of pure, unadulterated laziness. You look at these crime scene photos, and you see the truth that the police refuse to see. A mark on the neck, a line, a suggestion of something far more sinister than a cardiac event. A forensic pathologist looks at it and sees the red flags that scream for an autopsy that never came. The incompetence is not just a mistake, it is a crime. The arrogance of an investigator who tells a mother her son died of natural causes. And hey, at least he will not relapse anymore. I tell you, if I had been there, I would have had that man off the force before his badge hit the floor. It is cruel. It is inhuman. It is the kind of talk that makes you want to lock the door and never let the world in again. The truth is a persistent thing. It does not go away just because you stop looking for it. It waits. It lingers in the discarded items, in the digital footprints, in the stories of the people he helped. Spencer was a man of value. He helped the lost, and he deserved better than to be lost himself in the system. When you strip away the uniform, the badge, and the excuses, you're left with a simple, brutal reality. A mother is looking for answers, and the system is just getting in her way. It is a tragedy through and through. But the fight for the truth, that is the only thing that keeps us from being just as cold as the people who left Spencer in that dirt. We owe it to the victim to be better than the ones who failed them. And that, I tell you, is the only mission that matters. Humans are strange creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you can imagine, or worse. They die because those tasked with finding the truth are too lazy, too arrogant, or too inept to do their jobs. My. You have to be kidding me. I have walked many crime scenes in my time, and I tell you, a body does not just end up naked at a loading dock because of a cosmic coincidence. Someone is always responsible. Let us talk about Spencer Irwin, a 30-year-old man found face down in the dirt, discarded like a piece of trash. The authorities in Fresno saw a body and immediately decided they had read this book before. An overdose, a transient, case closed, go home, nothing to see here. They did not do an autopsy. They did not collect his clothes. They did not bother to look for the truth because the truth is hard work, and some people in badges prefer the easy lie. They called it natural causes, a polite way of saying they had no idea and even less interest in finding out. I look at the case files, and I see a young man who was struggling, yes, but he was a man with a life. A man with a mother who possessed more investigative grit than the entire department combined. Kelly Irwin refused to let her son be a statistic. When you strip away the incompetence, you find a timeline that does not fit the narrative. Spencer left his apartment on a Sunday, intending to fix his phone. He never arrived. He vanished into the California heat, only to reappear dead, days later, in a place he had no reason to be. The investigators want you to believe he wandered off, got hot, took his clothes off, and died. That is absurd. The so-called snow angel marks they found in the dirt are a convenient excuse to stop asking questions. Any detective worth his salt knows that when you see a body, you look for the story the environment is telling you. A body left in that condition, in that location, speaks of a sequence of events that someone is trying to hide. The victim, Spencer, was a soul who tried to lift others out of the darkness of addiction. He had a heart that saw value in the forgotten. And in a cruel, sharp irony, the men who found him stripped him of his own value, reducing him to a drug-induced tragedy because it kept their paperwork light. That is not just a failure of procedure. That is a moral failure. Then there is the shadow of other people in his life. An acquaintance named Angel, found in Spencer's apartment after his death, spinning stories that do not hold water. A neighbor named Tyler, accused of theft, with evidence that points to a man who might have been more than just a nuisance. You have a white vehicle, a Kia, caught on camera moving in the dark, turning off its lights. People do not turn off their lights in the middle of the night unless they have something to hide from the prying eyes of the world. I have seen enough death to know that the silence of a victim is loud. But it is the actions of the living that tell the real story. Spencer Irwin did not deserve to be a ghost in a system that did not care. He deserved an autopsy. He deserved a crime scene unit that actually stepped out of their van. He deserved justice. When you look at the evidence, the line across his neck, the missing belongings, the inconsistencies in the statements, you realize that the authorities did not fail to find the truth. They failed to look for it. They were blinded by their own bias. They looked at a man and saw a problem to be filed away, not a human being whose life was stolen. It is a tragedy, and it is entirely unacceptable. I tell you, when you stop looking for the truth because it is inconvenient, you are no better than the ones who caused the death in the first place. My, what a mess they have made of this. Human beings are strange creatures. They take their last breath for reasons so absurd, so entirely preventable, that it makes you wonder if we're living in a civilized society or merely observing a slow-motion car wreck in progress. You have to be kidding me. Spencer Irwin was a 30-year-old man who wanted to get better, who reached out for help, and yet he ended up discarded like yesterday's trash in a loading dock. My. The system is supposed to protect us, but in Fresno, they decided that a dead man in the dirt was just a statistic, a box to be checked and buried. The investigators looked at Spencer, naked and cold on the pavement, and they made a choice. They chose laziness. They assumed it was a drug overdose because that was the path of least resistance. It is the hallmark of a lazy detective to look at a scene and see what he wants to see rather than what is actually there. They did not perform an autopsy. They did not collect his clothes. They did not process the scene with any semblance of professional integrity. They just wanted to go home and call it a day. It is an insult to the badge and a mockery of justice. Spencer's mother, Kelly, she is the one who did the real police work. She did not have a gold shield or squad car, but she had something far more dangerous to a guilty conscience: the truth. She looked at the facts. Her son was not a drug user in the sense they claimed. His toxicology report came back with nothing more than minor traces that could never explain his death. He was a man fighting his own demons, not a man looking to end his life in a garbage-strewn corner. I look at the surveillance footage, the blurry image of that white Kia Soul turning off its lights in the dark of night, and I see a predator. Or at least I see his secret. You have a car pulling in, lights cut, staying for 15 minutes, and then vanishing. That is not a coincidence. That is a deliberate act. And while the police were busy telling a grieving mother that her son died of natural causes, as if a 30-year-old man just naturally walks 4 miles to a dock to undress and expire, Kelly was uncovering a web of lies. She found the man named Angel, the one who was supposed to be in rehab with her son, the one found in Spencer's apartment while the body was likely already cooling. The arrogance of the authorities is what gets to me. They gaslight the mother. They looked her in the eye and told her there was no evidence of homicide, failing to realize that the only reason there was no evidence is because they were too incompetent to look for it. They let a witness walk away who saw the marks on his neck, marks that an actual forensic pathologist would have recognized as a reason to stop everything and open a formal inquiry. A straight line under the jaw, a ligature mark. I tell you, it is a tragedy born of apathy. Spencer Irwin was a man who genuinely cared. He gave food to the hungry. He tried to lift up those who had been kicked aside by life, and in a cruel twist of fate, the very institutions he believed in treated him with that same cold indifference when he was the one in need. He was not just another transient. He was a son, a student, and a human being who deserved better than to be a forgotten name in a file that was closed before it was ever opened. We may not have the final answer yet. The truth has a way of hiding in the shadows, waiting for someone to shine a light on it. But I can tell you this. The narrative of natural causes is a fairy tale for people who do not want to do their jobs. Somewhere, someone knows why that car was there. Somewhere, the truth of those missing items and those final movements is written. And as long as people like Kelly refuse to stop digging, the silence that the killers and the incompetent investigators rely on will eventually break. You cannot bury the truth forever. It has a habit of rising to the surface, and when it does, God help the people who thought they could get away with murder. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for the most pathetic, trivial reasons you could ever imagine. They build their little castles of lies, thinking they're smarter than the law, but they always forget one thing. Every lie has a crack, and I'm a man who knows exactly where to swing the hammer. You have to be kidding me if you think you can bury a soul and walk away like it never happened. My, we are talking about the case of Christopher Cole Thomas, a young man with a life ahead of him, whose existence was extinguished by the cowardice of those around him. I tell you, it makes my blood run cold to think of 22-year-old boy, a salutatorian, a kid who wanted to heal others, finding himself in the middle of a snake pit of petty criminals in a town he did not even know. It was late, just after 3 in the morning, on a day meant for family. when two men named Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter showed up at a police station in Benson, North Carolina. They were not screaming. They were not weeping. They were as calm as a summer breeze, spinning a yarn about their friend Cole, who supposedly just panicked, grabbed the keys, and vanished into the darkness. A grown man does not just dissolve into thin air. And criminals rarely tell the truth unless they are backed into a corner with nowhere left to run. They claim Cole had mental problems, that he was paranoid. But that was just the first coat of paint they slapped over the rotting wood of their deception. These were men who had traveled from Minnesota not for Thanksgiving dinner, but to feed an addiction, to buy methamphetamine. They were playing with fire, and when the flames got too hot, they decided that the easiest way to handle the heat was to throw someone else into the furnace. The victim, Cole, was a bright light in a dark room. He was driven, smart, and was simply trying to make a buck before returning to his studies. He was not a drug dealer, yet he was trapped in a situation where he was clearly the outsider. When he realized the reality of his companions, his fear was not a mental health episode, as those liars suggested. It was the rational response of a man who realized he was walking into a nightmare. We look at the evidence, the surveillance footage, and we see the truth staring back at us. We see Cole walking, and we see Jeremy Carpenter right behind him. They were not alone, and they were not wandering aimlessly. They were moving through the geography of a crime. Then there's the matter of the cellular telephone, which these clowns kept in their possession long after Cole was missing. Why would you hold on to a dead man's phone if you were innocent? You do not. You hold on to it because you're trying to wipe away the history of your sins. They moved, they lied, and they shifted their stories like shifting sands. They spoke of praying at a church, of hearing a car door, and eventually, the truth started to leak out like sewage from a broken pipe. It was a botched deal, a double cross. Or perhaps just a situation that escalated because they did not have the drugs they promised. We have a name, Gordo, a man who allegedly helped track Cole down, and we have the agonizing, painful efforts of a father who had to bond out a suspect just to get a shred of the truth. It is a testament to the darkness of the human heart that these men could look a mother in the eye, knowing they had sent her son into the abyss and keep their mouths shut. Jeremy Carpenter took his secrets to the grave, and the others, they hide behind their silence. But the truth has a way of breathing on its own. They thought they could erase him, but they only succeeded in cementing their own pathetic legacies. A young man, full of potential, gone because of the greed of men who are not worth the space they occupy. It is a tragedy of the highest order, and it serves as a stark reminder that in this life, you are judged not by the friends you choose, but by the people you are forced to share a car with when everything goes wrong. Justice is a slow machine, but it is grinding, and one day, the final piece of this puzzle will fall. And they will realize that while they may have kept their secret for a time, they never truly escaped the consequences of their own hollow existence. I tell you, it is a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that somewhere out there, the truth is waiting to be exhumed.
A local hospital, where doctors successfully treated and stabilized her. Upon her medical release, she was immediately placed in handcuffs and officially arrested on major charges of murder and the malicious tampering with food and drug items. The family was swiftly informed of the dramatic arrest. A detective from York County called Nick to bring him up to speed, revealing that Lana had completely confessed to poisoning. Nick was driving when he received the call. He had to pull his vehicle over the side of the road immediately. The crushing realization hit him like a ton of heavy bricks. It felt like being physically struck. When Rosie heard the terrible news, she screamed into the telephone, completely shattered by the absolute betrayal. The legal process moved slowly, but on January 16, 2020, Lana accepted a formal plea deal. She stood before a judge and officially admitted her guilt to the downgraded charges of voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a drug or food product. In the courtroom, Lana continued to insist that her actions were born of ignorance, claiming she only knew about the eye drop trick from watching fictional television movies. She maintained that she had only ever intended to cause her husband temporary physical discomfort and diarrhea as petty revenge for his alleged emotional abuse. She stubbornly insisted she had never actually intended for Steve to die. However, absolutely no one in Steve's loyal circle of friends and family bought the desperate narrative that Steve had ever been abusive. They viewed her allegations as a cowardly attempt to assassinate the character of a deeply good man. Dozens of people who knew Steve intimately, including the many young professionals he had graciously mentored, came forward to vehemently defend his honor. They testified that he was a wonderfully gentle soul, completely incapable of harming anyone, and that there had never been a single whisper of abuse in his life. The family knew Lana was simply saying whatever she needed to say to save herself from a potential life sentence or even the death penalty. The most horrifying revelations came from the prosecution's detailed timeline, which was firmly based on the indisputable toxicology reports. Lana had claimed she administered the fatal dose on a Thursday morning in a single fit of anger. However, the scientific evidence proved that narrative was biologically impossible. Had Steve ingested that massive, lethal amount on Thursday morning, his body would have shut down and died that very same day. The fact that Steve had been violently ill and incapacitated in that urine-soaked bed for 3 agonizing days indicated a much more sinister reality. Lana had been continuously, methodically poisoning her husband with small doses of the chemical over a prolonged period. She tortured him slowly, systematically weakening his body. Steve was known to all as an immaculate man, an absolute clean freak. He would never have willingly remained in a heavily soiled bed unless he was physically paralyzed by weakness. Lana had purposely removed his cellular telephone, cutting off his only lifeline to the outside world. There was no traditional landline telephone in the sprawling house. He was entirely trapped, deeply confused, incredibly sick, and completely at the mercy of the very woman who was secretly killing him. The prosecution argued that by Saturday, Lana finally decided to finish the horrific job. She squeezed the entire remaining contents of the bottle into his water, watched him drink the lethal dose, and then casually walked outside to mow the grass, purposefully removing herself so she would not have to watch the final, gruesome moments of his death. Instead of being the compassionate, healing nurse she was trained to be, she had become the nurse from hell. The judge sentenced 53-year-old Lana Clayton to 25 solid years in state prison. Though she never once verbally admitted to intending to murder Steve, the cold, hard facts of the prolonged poisoning spoke volumes. For the family, no earthly penalty would ever feel great enough to balance the scales of justice. They had to grapple with the horrifying knowledge that Steve's supposed best friend had spent 3 days methodically torturing and poisoning him before finally taking his life. The sheer amount of calculated thought and cold-blooded patience required to maintain such a charade right through to the fake memorial service led the family to define her as nothing short of a monster. And the terrifying truth was that Lana had very nearly gotten away with the perfect murder. If the family had not forcefully intervened, and if there had not been a comprehensive autopsy and a specialized toxicology report, the coroner's initial ruling of a natural heart attack would have stood forever. If Lana had simply played the role of the quiet, gentle, grieving widow, no one outside the family would have ever harbored a single suspicion. The prosecution and the family firmly believed the true motive was entirely financial. Steve possessed immense wealth, and crucially, he resided in the state of South Carolina without a formally filed will. Under the state laws, in the absence of a will, every single asset automatically transferred to the surviving spouse. Lana knew perfectly well that if Steve was out of the picture, she would inherit absolutely everything. All a malicious actor had to do was quietly destroy any existing will and testament, and the fortune was theirs for the taking. In the aftermath of the trial, The family tried their best to heal and to move forward without Steve's guiding light in their lives. They frequently watched old home videos, taking comfort in the sound of his booming voice greeting them with a hearty, laughing hello. They deeply missed his over-the-top, magnificent personality. They missed the big, boisterous, gregarious character who could enter any dull room and instantly take over, filling it with warmth and joy. Steve had been a truly amazing person, and navigating a world without him proved to be an incredibly difficult journey. But what the family missed the absolute most was his infectious laughter and his unique, effortless ability to light up the darkest of days. Steve Clayton was senselessly stolen from everyone who loved him, but his legacy of profound generosity, fierce loyalty, and boundless joy would forever remain in the hearts of those he left behind. It was the 10th of March, 2007, in the vibrant city of Miami. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming jasmine and the rhythmic sounds of celebration. It was a momentous day for the bride, Rosemary Clayton, and her entire family. She was finally marrying the love of her life, William Leslie. Walking her down the aisle was her oldest brother, 52-year-old Steve Clayton. With his head held high and a bright, reassuring smile on his face, he stepped proudly beside her. Just 11 months prior to this joyous occasion, they had lost their beloved father. Rosemary had turned to her brother in her time of need. She had asked him if he would step in. Naturally, there had been a lot of tears, but they were tears of deep familial love. She could not imagine anybody else standing in place for their dad. When the minister asked who gave this woman to be married to this man, Steve replied with a strong, unwavering voice that he did, in the loving memory of their father. It was a deeply sentimental moment, bringing everyone together for something so special, honoring a beautiful legacy. With their father having passed, Steve had gracefully assumed the role of the head of the family. Even though he had never had children of his own, he had always been a steadfast father figure to his siblings. When their parents were married, Steve was just a toddler, about 2 or 3 years old. He grew up surrounded by 4 sisters, with Rosemary being the youngest, because he was 10 years older than her. There was truly never a moment in her life when Steve was not there. He was her big brother, and above all, he was her hero. He embodied everything a little girl would want in a sibling. During his high school years, he played football and wrestled, pursuits that made him seem larger than life in her young eyes. After high school, Steve graduated from college with a degree in finance. He quickly matured into a shrewd, yet incredibly compassionate businessman. Alongside a partner, Steve started a company called Physical Therapy Resources. Through sheer dedication and hard work, that venture eventually blossomed into a national enterprise, boasting physical therapy centers all over the country. Steve had actually met his business partner while they were both recovering in the same hospital, striking up a friendship that would change their lives. Because of his remarkable success, he was eventually able to sell his interest in the business. From that point onward, he was effectively retired. His grand goal had been to retire at the age of 40. He missed that ambitious target by only 1 single year, retiring at the age of 41. Selling his business freed up Steve to do whatever his generous heart desired, and what he wanted to do most was give back to the world. He spent countless hours mentoring a large group of young men, helping them start up their own businesses, or guiding them as they tried to figure out what direction they wanted their lives to take. He was extremely generous, not only with his financial resources, but more importantly, with his time. And Steve always had time for his family. During the wedding reception, Rosemary playfully filmed as Steve teased their Uncle Max. It was a special dynamic. Their father had been a rather serious man, but Steve brought a wonderful lightness to the room. When Uncle Max playfully asked where all of Steve's money came from, Steve just laughed, bringing a spirit of light-hearted humor to the gathering. Steve was always the life and soul of any occasion. He was always the first person to stand up and raise a glass for a toast. Grabbing the microphone, he called out a cheerful greeting to the room, entirely ad-libbing his speech straight from the heart. He joked that being funny was his way of getting away from all the emotional stuff. He looked at William and thanked him profusely, pretending he could not even look at him without crying. He thanked William for making his sister so incredibly happy. Steve was never one to hide his emotions. He shared with the room that before their father passed, he had instructed Steve to take care of his sister. Steve told Rosemary that he honored her and that their father had loved her very much, bringing the room to a chorus of happy tears and warm applause. He praised the newlyweds as great companions and partners, noting that he had never seen his sister happier. Following the beautiful speeches, Steve stepped up for the father and daughter dance. Before the music even started, there was a profoundly powerful surprise. A hidden recording of their dearly departed father began to play over the speakers. The voice spoke lovingly, recounting that the best moments of his days were when his little girl would climb onto his knee and say how much she loved him. The voice expressed a deep yearning for those days and declared an everlasting love. Steve had worn many hats that day. He was a stand-in father, the best man, the main entertainment, and the gentle anchor that kept everyone calm and smiling. He was an absolute natural at bringing joy to others. Chapter 2, A New Horizon. Despite his monumental success and his wonderfully close network of family and friends, Steve's own romantic life had faced a few rocky moments over the decades. He was always searching for a partner who was just as focused, determined, loving, and caring as he was. His family knew that was a rather tall order to fill. Now 52, his relatives figured it would take a truly remarkable person to sweep him off his feet. He was looking for someone he could connect with on an emotional, intellectual, and spiritual level. 3 years after the wedding, a brand new chapter began. In late 2009, Steve decided to leave his home state of Florida, seeking a peaceful change of pace in the beautiful landscapes of North Carolina. He had a profound love for physical activity, taking long walks, and breathing in the fresh air of the great outdoors. Moving away from South Florida afforded him the wonderful opportunity to spend much more time outside, surrounded by nature. Within just a few short months of his relocation, Steve happily announced to his family that he had met someone special. His voice carried a bright glow that had been missing for quite a while. He was undeniably excited. Her name was Lana Walsh. She was a nurse who had grown up in Oklahoma, 12 years his junior. To his family, she appeared very sweet and remarkably quiet. Her quiet nature stood out in stark contrast to Steve, whose personality was gigantic and booming. She was more of a wallflower, preferring the background while he naturally commanded the stage. Yet, despite their contrasting demeanors, Steve was absolutely certain she was the one for him. They were highly affectionate, constantly seen arm in arm. Steve was always hugging her, bringing out her gentle smiles. Rosemary felt nothing but pure happiness for her brother. She decided right then and there that anyone Steve loved, she would embrace with open arms. It was not long before Steve asked Lana to move in with him. He had persuaded her to join him in Charlotte. Steve could be exceptionally charming and convincing. Soon, they added some lovely new additions to their growing family. The first dog they adopted together was an Italian greyhound named Guinness. They completely fell in love with the breed, which led them to bring home a second one, a sweet dog they named Sadie. With Lana by his side, Steve finally felt that he had found his missing puzzle piece. He always had the most wonderful things to say about her, affectionately referring to her as his Lana Sue. He simply could not hide the deep feelings he harbored for her. He was very much in love. The family noticed how well-grounded Steve became. He had found a beautiful sense of peace. Steve had come to North Carolina looking for a pleasant change from his old routine. And in doing so, he had found a whole new future. When he had danced with his sister at her wedding years ago, he had dreamed of finding his own special someone. And now, 6 years later, he was preparing to marry the love of his life. The wedding took place on a lovely day in November of 2013. Family and friends traveled all the way to North Carolina just to share in the joy of that beautiful occasion. The intimate ceremony was held right at their house in Charlotte. It was a stunning event, radiating with warmth. The love between them was practically beaming. Shortly after tying the knot, the newlyweds decided to search for their forever home. They found a picturesque property just over the border in South Carolina, situated right on the tranquil banks of Lake Wylie. It looked exactly like a beautiful photograph from a glossy postcard. The gorgeous ocean blue home sat perfectly on a magnificent piece of lakefront property. It was absolutely lovely. Together, the couple eagerly set about refurbishing their new residence. They decorated the spacious rooms with Steve's extensive collection of cherished artworks and antiques. Objects held deep personal meaning for Steve, and he was immensely proud of the unique pieces he had collected over a lifetime of adventures. The new location allowed the couple to fully indulge in their shared love of nature. Whenever there was a fun, outdoors activity to partake in, Steve was always the first one in line, approaching every new hobby with boundless enthusiasm. Their move to South Carolina also meant the couple was significantly closer to Steve's extended family. Nick French, who had married Steve's niece in 2010 and proudly claimed the title of official nephew, found himself spending plenty of quality time with the couple. They frequently went out for wonderful dinners, attended lively concerts, and celebrated every major holiday together. They were also just a short 30-minute drive from Lana's son and her grandchildren. Steve and Lana never turned down an opportunity for a bit of babysitting. Steve possessed a magical way with children, largely because he had always remained a joyful child at heart himself. He was the kind of man who would immediately get down on the floor to play silly games, singing songs and making everyone laugh. With the children around, there was never a single dull moment in the Clayton household. Lana would lovingly film Steve as he playfully attempted to teach the twin granddaughters how to do the limbo. He would dramatically explain how to get real low to go under the stick, turning a simple dance into an uproarious theatrical performance. While Lana laughed with delight, the twins often found themselves far more interested in eating their sweet ice cream than learning the dance, which only made Steve laugh harder. He genuinely enjoyed playing all kinds of games, from strategic rounds of Scrabble to the silliest of children's board games. He would let the kids spin the colorful spinners, playfully arguing over the rules just to hear them giggle. He was a giant, loving teddy bear, and the children absolutely adored hanging on his every word. Lana was always game for the fun as well, joining in on the cheering and laughter. 5 years into their marriage, Steve and Lana appear to be thriving in their beautiful lakeside haven. Chapter 3: The Unforeseen Shadow. In June of 2018, a concerning shadow briefly passed over the Sunny household. Steve unexpectedly fell ill. He complained of feeling dizzy, mentioning that he was experiencing severe vertigo. He noted that his ear hurt and that a wave of nausea had washed over him while he was working out in the beautiful garden. Knowing his previous, albeit minor, battles with vertigo, Lana gently guided him inside. He felt incredibly weak and fatigued, assuming the bright afternoon sun had perhaps been too much for him. Trusting her extensive background as a nurse, Lana insisted that the absolute best remedy for him was immediate bed rest. Steve laid down in their comfortable room to sleep off the strange ailment. When Rosemary heard the news, she quickly called Lana to check on her brother. It seemed unusual for an active man to be so completely wiped out, losing nearly 36 hours to deep sleep. Lana spoke calmly, reassuring Rosemary that Steve was perfectly fine, that she was keeping a very close watch on him, and that she was making certain he was well taken care of. Although Steve had never experienced a bout of exhaustion quite like this, Lana confidently attributed it to simple overexertion. Rosemary felt a deep sense of comfort knowing that a trained medical professional was right there by his side. It seemed that Steve's larger-than-life energy had finally demanded a brief intermission. Fortunately, just 2 weeks later, the rest seemed to have worked wonders. Steve bounced back to his old, vibrant self. He threw a spectacular party to celebrate the 4th of July. That gathering was just as magnificent as every other joyous event he had ever hosted. Steve was his normal, highly affectionate self, ensuring every single guest felt welcomed and cherished. During the party, music filled the warm summer air. Steve immediately grabbed Lana for a dance, prompting all the guests to follow suit and join in the fun. Friends watched as the couple hugged and kissed under the festive lights, looking completely in love. Life was undeniably good at the Clayton home, and everyone present believed that Lana and Steve were destined for a very long, very happy future together. Chapter 4, A Sudden Farewell. Tragedy, however, has a way of arriving unannounced. On the 21st of July, 2018, an urgent call was made to the local emergency services in York County. Police units promptly arrived at the picturesque Blue House on the lake. When Sergeant Day stepped to the front door, the scene was one of profound stillness. Steve was found at the bottom of the grand wooden staircase. Sadly, the vibrant, joyful man who had brought so much light to the world had passed away. The responding officers spoke in gentle, hushed tones, deeply aware of Lana's presence nearby. She was visibly distraught and crying. The officers handled the situation with the utmost care, wishing to avoid causing any further distress to the grieving widow. Sergeant Day gently approached Lana to understand the events of the morning. Lana, polite even in her sorrow, insisted she was fine standing, not wanting to make the officer uncomfortable. She recounted that Steve had once again been suffering from intense dizziness over the past 2 days. She explained that she had been working outside, quickly mowing the lush green lawn, and when she returned indoors, she found that he had collapsed. Despite her extensive medical training, the shock and panic had overwhelmed her. She had immediately run outside, flagging down a passing motorcyclist to call for emergency assistance. The news traveled fast, striking the family with a heavy blow. Nick French, Steve's nephew who worked in law enforcement, received a tearful phone call from his mother. The disbelief was instantaneous. He rushed to the house as quickly as he could, his mind racing with questions. When the telephone rang in Rosemary's home, 700 miles away, the words were impossible to comprehend. The idea that her hero, her vibrant big brother, was gone seemed entirely unfathomable. The family immediately rallied around Lana, their hearts breaking for the woman who had lost her husband. They knew how much she loved him and could hardly imagine the pain of finding him in such a manner. Lana expressed her fear that a sudden bout of vertigo had caused him to fall down the stairs, a thought she found utterly heartbreaking. Sergeant Day, performing his duties with quiet respect, carefully checked the surroundings. The scene appeared to indicate a sudden medical emergency, a natural passing. A gentle walk through the upstairs hallway and the master bedroom revealed nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of any disturbance. The home remained a peaceful, albeit saddened, sanctuary. When the local medical examiner arrived, she noted a lack of any bruises or contusions that would typically accompany a severe fall, based on the physical indicators. She gently suggested that Steve had likely suffered a sudden heart event as he reached the bottom floor. Sergeant Day softly relayed this information to Lana, hoping to provide some small measure of closure regarding his final moments. Chapter 5, The Pursuit of Clarity. In the days that followed, the family focused on supporting one another. They helped tidy the home, ensuring it remained a comfortable sanctuary for Lana during her time of grief. However, as they moved through the house, a few puzzling details began to emerge. There were moments of confusion regarding the days leading up to Steve's passing, particularly concerning his beloved mobile phone, which he was famously never without. Lana mentioned it had been misplaced for several days while he rested. Furthermore, when the topic of arrangements and Steve's final wishes arose, the family was surprised. Steve, a meticulous accountant and a man who planned for every eventuality, had supposedly left no formal will. He had spoken deeply with Rosemary about his desire to rest in a beautiful, serene cemetery back in Fort Lauderdale. Yet Lana had already begun moving forward with local memorial plans. The memorial service, held on the 4th of August at the Lake House, was a highly emotional gathering. Everyone present felt an incredibly deep, enduring connection to Steve. Though designed as a celebration of his magnificent life, the profound sorrow of his sudden absence was palpable. Yet, amidst the tears, it was a space filled with beautiful memories, a testament to a life exceptionally well-lived. Despite the beautiful send-off, the family's intuition gently urged him to seek complete clarity. Steve's sudden passing, combined with the administrative anomalies, prompted them to formally request a standard toxicology evaluation from the medical examiner's office. It was a request born out of love, a desire to fully understand the medical circumstances that took their hero away so suddenly. The authorities, recognizing the family's earnest need for closure, agreed to proceed. Detective Motes, a dedicated professional with the local sheriff's office, gently guided the family through the waiting process. The initial reports maintained the likelihood of a natural medical event, but the comprehensive toxicology results would take a few weeks to finalize. The family waited with patience and hope for the absolute truth. When the final medical reports were completed, they provided an unexpected revelation. The scientific analysis detected elevated levels of a common over-the-counter substance, tetrahydrozoline, an ingredient typically found in soothing eye drops. While harmless when used topically as intended, the medical experts explained that internal ingestion could significantly impact the cardiovascular system. This new information shifted the perspective of the authorities. The dedication of the detectives shone brightly as they sought to understand how the substance had been introduced. During a follow-up conversation with Detective Motes, Lana provided a heartbreaking confession. In a moment of deeply misguided judgment and emotional overwhelming, she admitted to having added the liquid to his drinking water, mistakenly believing it would merely cause temporary, mild discomfort. She expressed profound regret, insisting she had never intended for the situation to result in a tragedy. The legal proceedings that followed were handled with solemnity. On the 16th of January, 2020, a resolution was reached. Acknowledging her actions, Lana accepted responsibility through a plea agreement for voluntary manslaughter. The court sentenced her to 25 years, concluding the legal chapter of the heartbreaking saga. While the circumstances of his passing were immensely difficult to comprehend, the family refused to let the tragedy define Steve's legacy. The diligent work of the investigators and the medical professionals had brought them the truth they sought, allowing them to finally begin the true process of healing. What remained, shining brighter than any darkness, was the immense, boisterous, and loving spirit of Steve Clayton. His family and the countless young men he had mentored chose to focus on the magnificent life he had built. They remembered his thunderous laughter, his unyielding generosity, and his uncanny ability to light up any room he entered. They missed his voice, his jokes, and his boundless affection. Though he was gone, the golden heart of the man who always made time for others continued to beat on in the cherished memories of everyone who had the profound privilege of loving him. The spring breeze carrying the scent of salt water swept through Miami on the 10th of March, 2007. It was a day of profound significance, painted with the golden hues of a Florida afternoon. For Rosemary Clayton, affectionately known to her loved ones as Rosie, it was the day she would finally marry the love of her life, William Leslie. However, beneath the joyous surface of the celebration, a quiet undercurrent of longing flowed through the gathering. Just 11 months prior, the Clayton family had lost their beloved patriarch. With their father gone, the family naturally turned to Rosie's oldest brother, 52-year-old Steve Clayton. Steve had never had children of his own, but to his siblings, he had always been a steady, guiding force. When their parents first married, Steve was merely 2 or 3 years old. He grew up alongside 4 sisters, with Rosie being the youngest, a full 10 years his junior. To her, there was never a moment in life when her big brother was not watching over her. He was her hero, a figure larger than life who played football and wrestled in high school, embodying everything a little girl could ever want in a protector. As the wedding procession began, Steve stood tall beside Rosie. The emotion in the air was palpable. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the officiant asked. Steve, his voice thick with a mixture of sorrow and immense pride, answered, "I do, in the memory of our father." There were tears naturally, but they were tears of profound love. Steve had taken his father's final wish to heart, to take care of his sister and honor the family. After the vows were exchanged, the reception transformed into a vibrant celebration. Steve, a man whose personality could fill any room, was in his element. He possessed a natural gift for lifting spirits. While their father had been a more serious man, Steve carried a bright, infectious humor. When the time came for the speeches, Steve was the first to stand. He grabbed the microphone, beaming at the crowd. "Hello, hello, hello," he announced, his voice booming over the speakers. "This is my way of getting away from the emotional stuff. William, thank you so much. I am not going to look at you right now. But thank you so much for making my sister so happy. You guys are great companions. You are great partners. And my sister, I have never seen her happier." He was ad-libbing, speaking directly from his generous heart. Following the speeches, a deeply moving moment unfolded during the father-daughter dance. A surprise recording of the departed father echoed through the hall, expressing his eternal love for Rosie. Steve stood close by, managing to be the best man, the entertainer, the peacekeeper, and the rock for everyone present. Steve's ability to provide for his family was not just emotional. It was material, born from years of brilliant dedication. After graduating from college with a degree in finance, he matured into a shrewd and visionary businessman. Alongside a partner, he founded a company called Physical Therapy Resources, eventually building it into a national enterprise with centers spanning the entire country. He was incredibly successful, yet he remained humble. His ultimate goal had always been to retire at the age of 40. He missed that ambitious target by only 1 year, retiring comfortably at 41. Selling his business freed Steve to pursue his true passions, giving back and connecting with people. He devoted his time to mentoring a large group of young men, helping them launch their own businesses or guiding them toward their life's purpose. He was generous with his wealth, but more importantly, he was generous with his time. Yet, despite his professional triumphs and his vibrant social circle, Steve's romantic journey had been rocky. He sought a partner who matched his focus, determination, and boundless capacity for love, a genuinely tall order. At 52, his family hoped it would just take a very special person to sweep him off his feet, someone with whom he could connect emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. Chapter 2, A New Horizon. By late 2009, Steve felt the urge for a change of pace. Leaving the familiar shores of Florida, he relocated to North Carolina. He had always been a deeply physical man who loved walking and immersing himself in the outdoors. The lush, mountainous landscapes and fresh air of the Carolinas offered him the perfect sanctuary. Within just a few months of his move, Steve shared some exciting news with his family. He had met someone. Those close to him noted a renewed glow in his demeanor, a spark that had been absent for a while. Her name was Lana Walsh. She was a Veterans Affairs nurse originally from Oklahoma, 12 years younger than Steve. To the family, Lana appeared as a stark contrast to Steve's gigantic, booming personality. She struck them as being exceptionally quiet, sweet, and unassuming, almost like a wallflower. despite their glaring differences in energy, Steve was absolutely certain she was the one. Whenever they were together, they were remarkably affectionate. They walked arm in arm, and Steve was constantly hugging her, kissing her forehead, and looking at her with total adoration. He affectionately called her his Lana Sue. The family, seeing how deeply in love he was, welcomed her with open arms. Rosie, thrilled to see her brother so happy, embraced Lana entirely. It was not long before Steve convinced Lana to move into his home in Charlotte. He could be wonderfully persuasive when he wanted something, and what he wanted was a life with her. To complete their new household, they brought in some furry companions. Their first dog was an elegant Italian greyhound named Guinness. Falling in love with the breed, they soon adopted a second one, naming her Sadie. With Lana and the dogs, Steve seemed to find the missing piece of his life's puzzle. He appeared well-grounded, experiencing a profound sense of peace that his bustling career had rarely allowed. The man who had once dreamed of finding his own special someone while dancing at his sister's. Wedding had finally secured his own future. Chapter 3. The House on the Lake. The love story culminated on a lovely day in November 2013. Family and friends traveled from all corners to gather at Steve and Lana's home in Charlotte for a beautiful, intimate wedding ceremony. The devotion radiating from the couple was visible to everyone. They were beaming, wrapped in the warmth of their shared promises. Shortly after tying the knot, the newlyweds decided to establish their forever home. They relocated just over the border into South Carolina, purchasing a stunning, ocean blue house nestled right on the serene banks of Lake Wylie. It looked like a photograph straight out of a beautiful travel postcard. Steve, a man who cherished history and personal connections, took immense pride in furnishing the new home. He filled the spacious rooms with his curated collection of unique artworks and rare antiques. Every object held a story, reflecting his meticulous nature and appreciation for beauty. The lakefront property also allowed the couple to fully indulge their love for nature. Whenever there was a fun, outdoors activity to pursue, Steve was the first one out the door, brimming with enthusiasm. The move also brought them closer to their extended family. Steve's nephew, Nick French, who had married into the family in 2010, became a frequent visitor. They shared countless dinners, attended concerts together, and celebrated every major holiday by the tranquil waters of the lake. They were also merely a 30-minute drive from Lana's son and her twin granddaughters. Steve, forever a child at heart, adored having the children around. He was the kind of man who would immediately drop to the floor to play games with the kids. Laughter constantly echoed through the house. Whether he was humorously attempting to demonstrate how to do the limbo under a broomstick, bending low and making silly faces while the twins watched, more interested in their ice cream, or engaging in animated rounds of board games and Scrabble, Steve was a massive teddy bear. He always had children hanging onto his arms, completely captivated by his joyous spirit. 5 years into their marriage, Steve and Lana appear to be living an idyllic, thriving life. It was a picturesque existence filled with generous gatherings, peaceful boat rides, and the comforting routine of unconditional love. Chapter 4. The Sudden Shadow. The serene surface of their lives rippled abruptly in June 2018. Steve, a man usually brimming with vitality, suddenly fell ill while working out in his beloved garden. An intense wave of dizziness and nausea washed over him. He complained to Lana of severe vertigo and a pounding headache, eventually becoming physically sick in the yard. Lana, drawing upon her professional background as a nurse, suggested it might be sunstroke and advised immediate bed rest. Steve managed to lie down, hoping to sleep off the strange affliction. According to the account he later shared, he closed his eyes and did not open them again for a staggering 36 hours. When Rosie heard about this mysterious illness, she immediately called Lana, deeply worried. Losing 36 hours of time was highly unusual and alarming for a man in such good health. Lana, however, offered calm reassurances. She explained that she was keeping a close, watchful eye on him, ensuring he was safe and comfortable. Trusting Lana's medical expertise, Rosie felt a wave of relief. She believed Steve was simply exhausted, that perhaps his larger-than-life energy had finally caught up with him, demanding a pause. Miraculously, just 2 weeks later, the shadows seemed to lift. Lana's attentive care appeared to have worked wonders. By the 4th of July, Steve was completely back to his old, exuberant self. He hosted a magnificent holiday party at the lake house, a gathering just as vibrant and joyful as all the ones before. He danced with Lana under the summer sky, holding her close, their affection for one another obvious to all the guests. Everyone who attended left with the comforting certainty that Steve and Lana's lives were destined to be long and beautifully happy. Chapter 5, The Unthinkable. The illusion of perfect happiness shattered on the 21st of July, 2018. A distress call was placed to the York County Emergency Dispatch. Police units were swiftly dispatched to the gorgeous lakefront home. Body camera footage recorded by the responding officer, Sergeant Day, captured a deeply somber scene. Just inside the front door, at the very bottom of the grand staircase, lay Steve Clayton. He had already passed away. The atmosphere in the house was heavy, broken only by hushed whispers to avoid further distressing Lana, who was crying softly in the next room. Sergeant Day approached the grieving widow to understand what had transpired. Lana explained that Steve had been suffering from severe dizziness for 2 days, a recurrence of his dreaded vertigo. She claimed that on Thursday morning he had stood up, become overwhelmingly dizzy, and collapsed. She had helped him up to their bedroom, and since that moment, he had not returned downstairs. On this particular morning, she told the officer she had stepped outside briefly to mow the lawn. Upon re-entering the home, she discovered him lying at the foot of the stairs. She described trying to place a blanket beneath him but realized, despite her medical training, she could not render any aid. Panicking, she had run outside to flag down a passing motorcyclist to call for help. News of the tragedy reached the family like a devastating shockwave. Nephew Nick French, working his shift as a police officer, received a frantic call from his mother. Disbelief washed over him. How? Why? He thought, rushing toward the lake house. Rosie, living 700 miles away, felt her world collapse when she heard the impossible news. Her hero, her invincible big brother, was gone. Nick and his family quickly rallied around Lana, their hearts breaking for the woman who had just lost her husband. Lana continuously repeated her fear that Steve's vertigo had caused a fatal tumble down the stairs. Sergeant Day, conducting a routine check for any signs of foul play, walked up the grand staircase. The house was quiet, devoid of any signs of a struggle. However, in the master bedroom, while the sheets were rumpled, there was no indication of a violent conflict. Downstairs, examining the carpet's fibers, Sergeant Day gently suggested to Lana that it did not appear Steve had tumbled violently. Rather, it looked as though he had painstakingly made his way to the bottom before collapsing. The coroner initially hypothesized that Steve had suffered a massive heart attack, noting a specific bluish coloration across his chest that often accompanied such events. While Lana processed the devastating conclusion, Nick and his relatives took it upon themselves to tidy the house, wanting to ensure Lana had a comfortable place to rest. But as they entered the upstairs master bedroom, they were met with something deeply disturbing. An overwhelming, foul odor of human waste permeated the room. Pulling back the linens, they discovered massive discoloration spots in the very center of the bed. The mattress was completely soaked, so heavy with fluids that it took immense effort just to carry it out of the house. The realization struck Nick with chilling clarity. Steve must have been languishing in that bed for days, unable to move. When Rosie spoke with Lana that evening, she pressed for details. Why had no one been called? Why was the family kept in the dark? Lana simply replied that Steve had been starting to feel better noting that he had slept heavily and had misplaced his cell phone a week prior. This detail struck Rosie as entirely impossible. Steve, a meticulous businessman, was absolutely inseparable from his phone. A knot of dark suspicion began to tighten in Rosie's chest. Chapter 6. The Search for Truth. The inconsistencies multiplied when Rosie gently inquired about Steve's will. Ensuring his wish to be buried in a beautiful cemetery in Fort Lauderdale would be honored, Lana bluntly stated that there was no will. Instead, Lana had already finalized arrangements for Steve to be cremated. On the 4th of August, 2018, a memorial service was held at the lake house. It was a highly emotional gathering. Guests struggled to balance their profound sorrow with the desire to celebrate a life so vibrantly lived. Yet, amidst the tears and tributes, Rosie noticed something truly shocking. Lana had already stripped Steve's closets bare. Every single stitch of clothing, his cherished watches, his jewelry, and even his wedding ring had vanished. Lana claimed she had donated the clothing to the Veterans Affairs Office. The family knew Steve as an incredibly organized accountant and a meticulous steward of his finances. The idea that he possessed Noah was entirely illogical. They were unanimous in their belief. Something deeply sinister was unfolding. Uniting in their resolve, the family contacted the medical examiner's office, pleading for a full autopsy and, crucially, a comprehensive toxicology report before the cremation could proceed. The officials agreed. The case landed on the desk of Detective Motes of the York County Sheriff's Office. Initially, the autopsy results seemed to align with the coroner's theory, pointing toward natural causes related to heart disease. But the absolute truth lay hidden within the blood. Weeks passed as the family waited on pins and needles. When the toxicology report finally returned, it was nothing short of astonishing. Steve's blood contained traces of several sedatives, but the most glaring anomaly was a massive, lethal concentration of tetrahydrozoline. Tetrahydrozoline is the active chemical ingredient found in common, over-the-counter eye drops used to reduce redness. It is strictly meant for topical use. When ingested in small amounts, it causes severe nausea, dizziness, and extreme discomfort. In large quantities, however, it acts as a deadly neurotoxin, severely limiting the blood supply to vital organs, shutting down the central nervous system, and ultimately inducing a fatal heart attack. Reviewing the body camera footage from the day of Steve's death, investigators noticed a bottle of eye drops sitting on a tall dresser in the bedroom, a place completely out of reach for a man immobilized in bed. The tragic reality crystallized. Steve Clayton had not died a natural death. He had been poisoned. Chapter 7. Unveiling the Shadows. 5 weeks after the sudden loss of her husband, Lana Clayton was brought in for questioning. Detective Motes guided the conversation toward the medications found in Steve's system. Lana listed several minor sedatives, confidently omitting any mention of tetrahydrozoline. Because the chemical is entirely colorless, odorless, and tasteless, it is a profoundly insidious weapon. The level found in Steve's blood was exceptionally high. The detectives pressed harder, confronting her with the inexplicable presence of the chemical. Cornered, Lana attempted to deflect by assassinating Steve's character. She claimed she lived constantly on eggshells, painting a picture of a man who was verbally abusive and quick to explode in anger. She stated that a co-worker had once casually mentioned that putting eye drops in someone's drink would cause them severe digestive distress, a misguided form of petty revenge. Then came the chilling confession. Lana admitted that during the days Steve was bedridden, supposedly suffering from vertigo, she saw the bottle on the table. Driven by what she claimed was sheer anger, she squeezed the liquid into his drinking water. "I think I put the whole thing in," she admitted to the detective. "I squeezed it hard. I just saw it there and I just did it." The detectives had what they needed, but they allowed her to return home while they secured the formal arrest warrants. The following morning, however, they received an urgent call from a neighbor. Lana had turned on the gas in the house, and ingested an array of pills, leaving suicide notes scattered about. She was rushed to the hospital, treated, and upon her release, immediately arrested and charged with murder and tampering with food products. When the family received the call, the news hit them with the force of physical blow. The betrayal was absolute. The gentle nurse they had welcomed into their family had meticulously tortured and killed the man who loved her. Medical experts confirmed the gruesome reality. Given the timeline and the massive dose, Steve would have died immediately had he consumed the entire bottle on Thursday. The fact that he languished in agony for days, immobilized on a soiled mattress without access to his phone, indicated that Lana had been systematically dosing him over time. Then, on Saturday, she administered the final, fatal amount before calmly going outside to mow the lawn. Chapter 8, The Legacy of Light. On the 16th of January, 2020, 53-year-old Lana Clayton stood before a judge and accepted a plea deal, attempting to avoid the maximum penalties associated with murder. She pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tamper with a drug or food product. She steadfastly maintained that she never intended to cause his death, only his discomfort. The family and the prosecution firmly rejected this narrative. The meticulous isolation, the hidden phone, and the deliberate administration of a tasteless poison pointed undeniably to a calculated act, motivated by immense financial gain. Without a will, all of Steve's substantial assets would have defaulted entirely to his spouse. The judge handed down a sentence of 25 years in prison for the family. No amount of time behind bars could adequately compensate for the suffering Steve endured or the immense void his absence created. He was a gentle soul, completely incapable of harming another human being, and he had been ruthlessly stolen from everyone who loved him. If the family had not trusted their instincts, if they had not fiercely advocated for an autopsy, the truth would have remained forever buried beneath a false narrative of a tragic, natural heart episode. Today, the Clayton family actively chooses to remember the man he truly was, rather than the dark circumstances of his passing. They focus on the positive emotions he inspired, the young entrepreneurs he guided, and the deep educational value of his life's work. Though it's profoundly difficult not having him around, his spirit remains a guiding light. Rosie often thinks of the beautiful Miami breeze from her wedding day, listening to the echoes of her big brother's vibrant, booming voice filling the air. Hello, hello, hello. They remember the laughter, the absolute joy he brought to every gathering, and his remarkable ability to walk into any room and instantly make the world feel a little bit brighter. Steve Clayton's legacy is not defined by the shadows of his final days, but by the enduring, magnificent light of a life well and generously lived. Welcome to a celebration, a night joining two wonderful people. The date was March 10th, 2007, in the vibrant city of Miami. It was a monumental day for the bride, Rosemary Clayton, known to everyone affectionately as Rosie, and her entire family. She was finally marrying her love, William Leslie. Walking her proudly down the aisle was Rosie's oldest brother, 52-year-old Steve Clayton. Just 11 months prior to her wedding, the family had lost their beloved father. Rosie had asked her brother if he would step in, and naturally, there were a lot of tears. She could not imagine anybody else standing in place of her father. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the officiant asked. "I do, in the memory of my father," Steve replied, his voice thick with emotion. It was deeply sentimental for the family to be gathered at something so special where their dad was, not present with their father's passing. Steve had stepped up as the head of the family. Though he had never had children of his own, he had always been a father figure to his siblings. When their father and mother were married, Steve was just about 2 or 3 years old. He grew up with 4 sisters, with Rosie being the youngest, 10 years his junior. There really was not a single moment when Steve was not a guiding force in Rosie's life. He was her big brother, and he was her absolute hero. He was everything a little girl would want in an older sibling. He played football and wrestled in high school, which made him seem larger than life. After high school, Steve graduated from college with a degree in finance and quickly matured into a shrewd, intelligent businessman. Together with a partner, Steve started a company called Physical Therapy Resources. That small venture eventually blossomed into a massive national company with physical therapy, centers located all over the country. Steve's success was a testament to his hard work, and he eventually sold his interest in his business. Basically, from that point on, he was retired. His lifelong goal had been to retire at the age of 40. He missed that ambitious target by only 1 year, retiring happily when he was 41. Selling his business freed up Steve to do whatever his heart desired. What he wanted to do most was give back to the world. Steve's acts of generosity: mentoring a large group of young men, helping new entrepreneurs start up their own businesses, guiding young adults to find out what direction they wanted their lives to take, donating his abundant time and resources without hesitation. Steve always had time for his family. During gatherings, Rosie would often film him as he affectionately teased their Uncle Max. "It is special," Rosie would note. "My dad was not so funny. He was much more serious. But Steve, he is the light of the room." When Rosie got married, it was Steve's good humor that made him the life and soul of the occasion. He was always the first guy to get up to give a toast anywhere. "Hello, hello, hello," he announced to the cheering wedding guests. It was always ad-libbed, always spoken purely from the heart. "This is my way of getting away from the emotional stuff. William, thank you so much. I am not going to look at you, but thank you so much for making my sister so happy. And my dad." Steve was never one to hide his emotions. "My dad told me, before he passed, to take care of my sister, to honor you, and he loved you very much. I have to get serious here. All right, I am cool. You guys are great companions. You are great partners. And my sister, I have never seen her happier." After the beautiful speeches, Steve stepped up for the traditional father and daughter dance. They got ready to dance, and before the music even started, they shared a profoundly powerful moment. A surprise recording of their dearly departed father played out across the banquet hall. "The best moment of my day was when you were climbing my knee. You would say, 'Daddy, I love you.' I miss those days. I really do, because I love you too." Steve had so many duties that day. He was acting as a father, he was the best man, he was the entertainment, and he was the one who kept everyone calm and laughing. He was a complete natural at spreading joy. Chapter 2, a new chapter. Despite his immense professional success and a wonderfully close network of family and friends, Steve's own romantic life had historically been a rocky journey. He constantly looked for a partner who was as focused, determined, loving, and caring as he was. That was a very tall order to fill. Now 52, his family figured it would take a truly special person to sweep him off his feet. Steve was always looking for somebody on a level he could connect with emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. 3 years later, that is exactly what happened. In late 2009, Steve decided to leave his home state of Florida for a refreshing change of pace in North Carolina. He loved being physical, he loved walking, and he loved anything to do with being outdoors. Moving from South Florida to North Carolina gave him the wonderful opportunity to be out in nature a lot more. Within just a few months of his move, Steve happily announced that he had met someone special. He seemed to have a radiant glow that he had been missing for a little while, and he was undeniably excited. Her name was Lana Walsh. She was 12 years his junior, a dedicated nurse who grew up in the quiet landscapes of Oklahoma. "She struck me as being very sweet," Rosie recalled. "Very quiet, but very sweet. And this quietness kind of stood out because Steve was never very quiet." Steve's personality was gigantic, while she was more like a gentle wallflower. Despite their apparent differences, Steve was absolutely sure she was the one. They were incredibly affectionate with each other, always walking arm in arm. Steve was always hugging her, squeezing her, and kissing her forehead. Rosie felt overjoyed for her brother. Anybody that he loved, the family was fully ready to embrace. It was not long before Steve asked Lana to move in with him. After they got to know each other quite a bit more, Steve persuaded her to come to Charlotte. Steve could be very convincing when he followed his heart. They soon added some beautiful new additions to their growing family. The furry companions. Guinness, an elegant Italian greyhound, and their first shared pet. Sadie, another sweet greyhound they adopted because they loved the breed so much. With Lana, Steve finally felt he had found his missing piece. He always had phenomenal things to say about her, lovingly referring to her as his Lana Sue. He could not hide the deep feelings he had for her. I think Steve found himself wonderfully well grounded with Lana, a close friend observed. He found a certain sense of peace with her. Steve Clayton had come to North Carolina for a change from his old life and ended up finding a whole new future. When Steve had danced with his sister at her wedding, he dreamed of finding his own special someone. 6 years later, he was about to marry the love of his life, a Veterans Affairs nurse named Lana Walsh. It was a perfectly lovely day in November 2013. Many family members traveled to North Carolina just to be there and enjoy that magical day with him. He made it incredibly special for absolutely everyone. The beautiful wedding took place at their house in Charlotte. You could just see the pure love beaming from both of them. Chapter 3, The Lakefront Dream. Soon after tying the knot, the couple decided to relocate and move into their ultimate forever home just over the border in South Carolina, sitting peacefully on the banks of Lake Wylie. It looked exactly like something straight off a postcard. The gorgeous ocean blue home sat perfectly on a magnificent piece of lakefront property. The couple enthusiastically set about refurbishing their new house, thoughtfully decorating it with Steve's prized collection of artworks and rare antiques. Steve was the kind of person to whom objects were deeply personal, and he was very proud of his unique possessions. The significant move allowed the couple to fully indulge in their shared love of nature. If there was something fun and outdoorsy to do, Steve was going to be the very first one out there. He was entirely gung-ho about enjoying every single moment. Their relocation to South Carolina also meant the happy pair were physically closer to Steve's extended family. His nephew Nick, who had married into family in 2010, lived nearby. We hung out with Steve and Lana a lot when they moved up here. Nick shared warmly. We would go out to lovely dinners with them. We would go to musical concerts, and we would celebrate special events every single holiday. They were also just a brief 30-minute drive from Lana's son and beloved grandchildren. The pair absolutely never said no to a bit of joyous babysitting. Steve had a magical way with children because he had always been a pure child at heart. He was the kind of guy who would eagerly get right down on the floor and play endless games with the kids, with the children around. There was truly never a dull moment in the Clayton household. Home videos captured Steve hilariously attempting to describe the limbo dance while Lana's twin. Granddaughters watched with giggles. "We will make Papa do it," they cheered. "So there's a stick, and I gotta go like that," Steve would dramatically explain, bending backward. "And I have got to go under the stick. And I have got to get real low to get under the stick." Lana was always tickled by his antics, capturing the memories on camera. Steve genuinely enjoyed playing all kinds of games, whether it was a competitive round of Scrabble or a delightfully silly children's board game. He was a huge, lovable teddy bear, and the kids were always hanging onto his arms. 5 years deeply into their peaceful marriage, Steve and Lana appear to be absolutely thriving. Chapter 4, A Sudden Shadow. In June 2018, the bright skies over the Clayton home momentarily clouded. Steve unexpectedly fell ill. He complained of feeling terribly dizzy and experiencing intense vertigo. He mentioned that his ear hurt and that he felt nauseous, eventually becoming sick out in the beautiful yard. Knowing his previous minor issues with vertigo, Lana, utilizing her professional nursing experience, suggested that strict bed rest was the very best remedy. Steve laid down to rest. When he finally opened his eyes, he claimed a shocking 36 hours had passed. Highly worried, Rosie called Lana immediately to see if she could medically explain Steve's mystery illness. I asked her what she thought was going on, because that is a very odd thing for any person of any age to lose 36 hours of precious time, Rosie stated. Lana reassured me that he was fine, that she was carefully watching him, and making completely sure he was okay. Though he had never been ill exactly like this before, Lana believed Steve was simply exhausted. Rosie felt comforted knowing that Lana was there to take excellent care of him, especially given her extensive knowledge as a registered nurse. Just 2 weeks later, it delightfully appeared that the rest and treatment had worked perfectly. Steve was completely back to his vibrant old self, throwing a massive, joyous party for the 4th of July. That sunny party was just as incredible as every other gathering they had ever hosted. Steve was his normal, highly affectionate self, and everybody had a truly fantastic time. Guests watched with smiles as Steve grabbed Lana for a romantic dance, holding her close as they celebrated in grand style. I remember watching them hug and him kiss her gently, a guest noted. They looked completely in love. Things were wonderful at the Clayton home, and absolutely no one doubted that Lana and Steve's lives were going to be exceptionally happy and endlessly long. Chapter 5, Seeking the Truth Through Science. On July 21st, 2018, a very unexpected and somber call came into the York County 911 dispatch. When police units gracefully arrived on the quiet scene, they were met with an incredibly sad reality. Sergeant Day entered the beautiful home to find that Steve had suddenly passed away near the grand staircase. The officers respectfully maintained low, comforting voices, knowing that Lana was just around the corner, understandably distraught. Sergeant Day gently spoke with Lana to understand the sequence of events. "Ma'am, I am Sergeant Day. I am going to be right here for just a little while until the coroner gently arrives." Lana explained that Steve had been suffering severe dizziness for 2 days. She detailed how he had stood up, experienced extreme vertigo, and tragically collapsed. "I was mowing the lawn real quick, and when I came in, I found him," Lana explained, her voice trembling. "I tried to tuck a warm blanket underneath him." Nephew Nick French, who was proudly serving on duty as a police officer in a neighboring district at the time, received the heartbreaking news from his mother. She said, "Uncle Steve died. It was pure disbelief. I got down there as quickly as I humanly could. The whole time I just kept thinking, how? Why?" With Rosie living 700 miles away, Nick and his compassionate family immediately rallied around Lana to offer their unwavering support. They lovingly cleaned the home, ensuring Lana would have a comfortable and peaceful environment to rest in during her time of deep grief. However, as the family and professional coroner respectfully observed the scene, certain small details prompted a deeper, more educational search for medical truth. The coroner initially suggested that Steve might have suffered a natural heart event. Yet, the family, knowing Steve's meticulous nature and excellent health, felt a strong, loving obligation to ensure every single medical fact was thoroughly explored. When they realized Steve's cell phone had been misplaced for a week, and that his vital legal documents were unexpectedly missing, their protective instincts activated. The steps toward clarity. The family formally requested a comprehensive autopsy out of deep love and respect. They specifically asked a medical examiner to perform a detailed toxicology screening. Dedicated Detective Motes of the York County Sheriff's Office was notified to help find the scientific truth. The family waited patiently on pins and needles for the thorough scientific results. The educational process of forensic toxicology requires incredible precision and takes several weeks to complete accurately. When the detailed report finally arrived, it provided a stunning medical revelation. It showed unexpected traces of several sedatives. But the most significant scientific discovery was the presence of a chemical compound known as tetrahydrozoline. Tetrahydrozoline is the primary active ingredient commonly found in standard, over-the-counter eye drops. Scientifically, while it is perfectly safe when used topically in the eyes to reduce minor redness, it is never medically intended to be ingested internally. Educational note on tetrahydrozoline. When introduced into the human digestive system, this chemical acts rapidly on the central nervous system. It restricts vital blood vessels, causing sudden nausea, severe dizziness, and in large, concentrated quantities, it can critically limit the blood supply to vital organs, leading to a profound medical emergency. The dedicated detectives realized that this odorless, colorless, and tasteless liquid was the unseen factor. It became undeniably clear that this was not a natural medical event. The pursuit of justice and truth had to move forward to protect the integrity of Steve's wonderful legacy. Chapter 6. The Path to Resolution. 5 weeks after the sudden, heartbreaking loss of their beloved patriarch, the professional investigators compassionately but firmly sat down with Lana. Detective Motes engaged in a series of detailed interviews to understand the full reality of the situation. Initially, the discussions revolve around the various medications found, but eventually, the clear scientific evidence of the tetrahydrozoline could not be ignored. The investigators carefully probed the dynamics of Steve and Lana's relationship, seeking to understand the psychological environment of a household. During a subsequent and highly emotional conversation, Lana requested to speak privately with Detective Motes once more. It was during this deeply serious moment that the truth finally surfaced. She tearfully admitted to holding deep internal frustrations and confessed that she had misguidedly placed the eye drop fluid into his drinking water, heavily influenced by a tragic misunderstanding of the chemical's true danger. She claimed she had only intended to cause temporary stomach discomfort, tragically unaware of the severe, fatal physiological consequences of the chemical compound. The confession was a heavy, solemn moment. It was a stark reminder of how severely dangerous the misuse of everyday household medical products can be, and how vital it is to handle all medicinal items with the utmost caution and respect. On January 16, 2020, the legal proceedings reached a calm and structured conclusion. Lana accepted a formal plea agreement, taking legal responsibility for her grievous actions. She pleaded guilty to charges of voluntary manslaughter and the tampering of a food product. She was given a sentence of 25 years, ensuring that accountability was firmly established. Chapter 7. The Enduring Light. While the judicial process provided a necessary sense of closure, the family chose to focus their boundless energy entirely on the magnificent, bright life Steve had led, rather than the shadows of his departure. They reflected deeply on the importance of family, the necessity of absolute honesty, and the value of cherishing every single moment with loved ones. Steve's legacy was not defined by his final days, but by the brilliant, towering decades of joy he generously gave to the world. I miss a lot about Steve, but I really miss his booming voice, Rosie shared, smiling through her peaceful tears. I miss hearing him say, "Hello, hello, hello." His friends fondly remembered his over-the-top personality, describing him as a big, boisterous, gregarious character who could enter any dull room and instantly fill it with pure sunshine. Steve was an absolutely amazing person, Nick reflected proudly. The beautiful thing I miss the most is his infectious laughter and his unique ability to light up the world around him. Through the tears, the family found incredible strength. They continued his beautiful legacy of mentoring the youth, giving generously to those in need, and living life with a giant, welcoming heart. Steve's story serves as a profound, educational reminder of the fragility of life and the immense, enduring power of familial love. His spirit continues to dance gracefully in the hearts of his sisters, his nephews, and the countless young people whose lives he permanently elevated. Love, ultimately, remains the greatest and most victorious force of all. The story begins with a man whose life was defined by his extraordinary generosity and his boundless capacity to love. William Stephen Clayton, known to all as Steve, was a successful businessman whose achievements were matched only by his deep devotion to those around him. He was a man who stood as a pillar for his family, particularly for his youngest sister, Rosemary, whom he adored with a protective, lifelong affection. When Rosemary prepared for her wedding on the 10th of March, 2007 in Miami, the absence of their late father was felt deeply by everyone. Steve, however, stepped into that role with a grace and emotional depth that moved all in attendance. He walked his sister down the aisle, standing in as the head of the family, and during his toast, he spoke with the heartfelt, unscripted honesty that had become his trademark. He cherished his family, and though his own path to finding a life partner was complex, he never lost his optimism or his desire to find someone who could truly match his spirit. Years later, in the late months of 2009, Steve sought a change of pace and moved from the familiar warmth of Florida to the quiet landscapes of North Carolina. It was here that he met a nurse named Lana Walsh. She was a woman who seemed, at first glance, to be the antithesis of Steve. While he was boisterous, gregarious, and larger than life, she appeared quiet and reserved. Yet Steve saw something in her that anchored him. He called her his Lana Sue, and he was deeply, visibly in love. For a man who had mentored many and built a life based on hard work and kindness, finding a partner who could share his quiet moments as well as his adventures felt like the missing piece of his life. In November of 2013, they were married in a beautiful ceremony at their home, and shortly thereafter, they moved to a stunning property on the banks of Lake Wylie in South Carolina. The new home was a paradise, a place where Steve hoped to spend his future. They filled the house with antiques and art, surrounding themselves with the things they loved. They were close to family, and Steve continued to be the uncle who would get down on the floor to play games with his nieces and nephews, his laughter often filling the rooms. For 5 years, the life they built seemed like an idyllic portrait of success and happiness. However, the veneer of this perfect life began to crack in the summer of 2018. Steve, a man known for his robust energy, suddenly became ill. He complained of severe vertigo, nausea, and intense headaches. He found himself unable to function, often trapped in bed, feeling as though the world were spinning out of his control. Lana, drawing upon her background as a nurse, took care of him. She urged him to rest, and those around them, including Steve's sister Rosemary, felt a sense of relief knowing that a medical professional was by his side. But the illness did not pass quickly. It was persistent and mysterious, leaving Steve weak and isolated. On the 21st of July, 2018, a call was made to emergency services. When authorities arrived at the beautiful lakefront home, they found Steve Clayton unresponsive at the bottom of the grand staircase. He had passed away. Lana was distraught, an immediate assumption among those present, including the responding officer and the coroner, was that Steve had suffered a tragic, natural event, perhaps a heart attack brought on by his health struggles. In the days that followed, the family began to notice things that did not align with the narrative of a grieving, devoted widow. Steve's sister Rosie and his nephew Nick were struck by a sense of unease. They discovered the bedroom where Steve had spent his final days in a condition that suggested profound neglect, a sharp contrast to the man they knew who valued cleanliness and order above all else. Furthermore, Lana's claims that there was no will and her rapid disposal of Steve's personal belongings, including his clothes and jewelry, raised immediate red flags. Steve was a meticulous man, an accountant by trade. The idea that he would not have a will felt impossible. Driven by a deep-seated suspicion that something sinister had occurred, the family pushed for an autopsy and a toxicology report. The results of the toxicology report shattered the illusion of a natural death. Investigators discovered lethal quantities of tetrahydrozoline, an ingredient found in common eye drops in Steve's system. It was a substance that, when ingested, could lead to a slow and agonizing decline, eventually shutting down vital organs. The realization was sickening. The man who had been a source of light and laughter for so many had been methodically poisoned. When confronted with the evidence, Lana Clayton eventually admitted to her actions. She claimed she had been motivated by the desire for revenge, alleging that Steve had been verbally and physically abusive, a claim that his family and friends, who knew his gentle nature, vehemently denied. She confessed to putting the substance in his water, describing a cold and calculated process. The investigation revealed a harrowing reality. Steve had not simply succumbed to sudden illness. He had been subjected to a prolonged period of poisoning. He had been left in a state of helplessness, without access to his phone or assistance. While his life was drained away, bit by bit, the nurse who was supposed to be his caretaker had become his executioner. Lana Clayton was eventually sentenced to 25 years in prison. Her actions left behind a family that was forever changed, forced to grapple with the betrayal of someone they had welcomed into their lives with open arms. The loss of Steve Clayton was felt profoundly by everyone who knew him. They remembered him not for the tragic circumstances of his final days, but for the man who lived with his heart on his sleeve. They missed his booming laugh, his ability to turn any room into a celebration, and his unwavering generosity. The case served as a dark reminder of how fragile life can be, and how the people we trust the most can sometimes hide motives that are beyond comprehension. Though justice was served in a court of law, the void left by Steve's absence could never be filled. He remained, in the memories of those who loved him, a man who gave everything he had to the world, a man who was, in every sense, a hero to his sister and a beacon of warmth to all his friends. His story, while stained by the cruelty he faced, continues to inspire those who strive to live with the same kindness and courage that defined William Stephen Clayton's life. His legacy survives in the many lives he mentored and the love he planted, a testament to a spirit that no amount of shadow could truly extinguish. The world lost a truly remarkable person, but his laughter and his memory remain, held tightly by those who knew that for a time. They were lucky enough to walk through life alongside a man of such rare and genuine character. The narrative begins in the bustling city of Miami, under the warm, golden sun of March, in the year 2007. This was a day of monumental significance for the Clayton family. As Rosemary Clayton prepared to walk down the aisle to marry her beloved William Leslie, with the passing of their father just 11 months prior, the mantle of family leadership had fallen upon the shoulders of the eldest brother, Steve Clayton. At 52 years of age, Steve was more than just an older brother. He was a pillar of strength, a mentor, and a father figure who had been a constant, guiding force in the lives of his 4 younger sisters. He had navigated complexities of life with the precision of a seasoned financier, building a successful company called Physical Therapy Resources, which eventually grew into a national presence. Having retired at the age of 41, Steve dedicated his post-professional life to generosity, mentoring young men and sharing his resources and time with unwavering devotion. As the wedding ceremony unfolded, it was Steve who stood as the heartbeat of the celebration. His boisterous, gregarious nature turned the occasion into a joyous tribute to love and family bonds. During his toast, he displayed his characteristic warmth, delivering heartfelt, unscripted words that moved everyone in attendance. He spoke of honoring their father and welcoming William into the family fold. The emotional climax occurred during the father-daughter dance, when a surprise recording of their late father played, leaving not a dry eye in the room. Steve, ever the orchestrator of happiness, ensured that every moment was filled with laughter and sentiment. Yet, despite his outward success and deep connections with his siblings, Steve's own romantic journey had been long and searching. He was a man of intense focus and deep feeling, seeking a partner who could match his intellectual and spiritual depth. Years later, in late 2009, Steve decided to embrace a change of pace, moving from the familiar landscape of Florida to the quiet allure of North Carolina. It was there that he crossed paths with Lana Walsh, a woman 12 years his junior and a nurse by profession. To his family, she appeared quiet and unassuming, a stark contrast to Steve's vibrant and energetic personality. Nevertheless, their affection for one another was palpable. They were inseparable, often seen walking arm in arm, with Steve frequently expressing his devotion to her. As their relationship blossomed, Lana moved to Charlotte, and they began to build a life together, eventually adding 2 Italian greyhounds, Guinness and Sadie, to their household. For Steve, it seemed as though he had finally found the missing piece of his life's puzzle, finding a sense of peace and groundedness that he had long sought. Their love culminated in a beautiful wedding ceremony held at their home in November of 2013. Shortly thereafter, the couple relocated to a picturesque, ocean blue residence on the serene banks of Lake Wylie in South Carolina. The house became a reflection of their shared life, decorated with Steve's cherished collection of antiques and art. Their new home brought them closer to Steve's extended family, including his niece and her husband, who became frequent visitors. Steve, always a child at heart, delighted in the presence of family, often found playing on the floor with children or engaging in light-hearted games. Videos captured during these years show a man filled with joy, playing charades or patiently explaining the rules of the limbo to his young grandnieces, surrounded by the warmth of those he loved. However, the tranquility of their life began to fracture in June of 2018. Steve, a man who prided himself on his vitality and active lifestyle, suddenly fell victim to a mysterious illness. He complained of persistent dizziness, nausea, and vertigo, symptoms that left him incapacitated for days. During this time, he spent long periods confined to bed, isolated from the outside world. His sister, Rosemary, grew concerned, but was repeatedly reassured by Lana that Steve was simply exhausted and recovering under her professional care. Remarkably, just 2 weeks later, Steve seemed to rebound, hosting a spirited 4th of July party where he appeared to be his vibrant, affectionate self once more. No one present at that gathering could have suspected the darkness that was quietly gathering behind the scenes of their seemingly idyllic life. The turning point occurred on July 21st, 2018. A call was placed to the York County Emergency Services, and upon their arrival, responding officers found Steve Clayton lying at the foot of the grand staircase, his life already extinguished. Lana was present, appearing distraught and claiming that Steve had suffered a tragic fall as a result of his ongoing battle with vertigo. Sergeant Day, the responding officer, conducted a preliminary assessment, noting the absence of any signs of a struggle or foul play in the house. The scene appeared consistent with a sudden, tragic medical event. As the coroner arrived, the initial assessment pointed toward a heart attack, an opinion seemingly supported by the physical signs present at the time. In the aftermath, the family, reeling from the sudden loss of their hero, sought to support Lana in her grief, despite noticing unsettling details, such as the condition of the master bedroom, which showed signs of severe neglect. As the days passed, suspicions began to gnaw at the family. They learned that Steve, a man known for his meticulous financial planning, allegedly had no will, a fact that defied his lifelong habits. Furthermore, Lana began disposing of his personal belongings with uncharacteristic speed, donating his clothes and jewelry to charitable organizations before the funeral had even concluded. The family's unease prompted them to request a formal toxicology report. The results, when they finally arrived, sent shockwaves through the community. The laboratory found significant traces of sedatives and, most alarmingly, a lethal quantity of tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient found in common eye drops. This substance, while harmless for its intended ocular use, is deadly when ingested, causing a total collapse of the central nervous system. The discovery transformed the narrative from a natural tragedy into a calculated act of violence. Detective Motes of the York County Sheriff's Office took up the investigation, confronting Lana with the damning evidence. Under questioning, Lana eventually confessed to the poisoning, though she attempted to frame her actions as a reaction to perceived emotional and verbal abuse from Steve. She admitted to systematically administering the substance, ostensibly to induce illness. But the sheer quantity found in Steve's system painted a much grimmer picture. The evidence suggested that Steve had been slowly poisoned over the course of 3 days, unable to seek help or call for assistance as his health declined. The tragedy of Steve's final days was further highlighted by the fact that he was, at his core, a person of profound integrity and kindness. Those who knew him, the young men he mentored, his friends, and his grieving siblings, vividly rejected the portrait of the man that Lana attempted to construct. They remembered a man who was generous, loving, and incapable of the malice she described. Following her failed suicide attempt and subsequent arrest, Lana Clayton pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a drug or food product in early 2020. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. For the Clayton family, the sentence provided a semblance of justice, but it could never fill the void left by a man who had touched so many lives with his laughter, his wisdom, and his boundless heart. The story of Steve Clayton remains a testament to a life lived with passion and devotion, a legacy that continues to inspire those who are fortunate enough to call him a brother, a mentor, and a friend. The sun cast a gentle glow across the vibrant landscape of Miami. On that memorable 10th day of March in the year 2007, it was a day etched in the hearts of all who witnessed it. A celebration of two souls finding their harbor in one another. Rosemary Clayton, a woman of grace and kindness, prepared to step into a new chapter of her life alongside her beloved William Leslie. Amidst a flurry of excitement and the soft hum of anticipation, there stood a man whose presence was as steady as a lighthouse, Steve Clayton. At 52 years of age, Steve, the eldest of the siblings, carried the weight of tradition and the warmth of a protective father figure. As he prepared to walk his sister down the aisle, the weight of their father's absence was palpable. Yet Steve stood tall, embodying the legacy of the man who had shaped them all. He had promised to honor their father's memory, and on this day, he did so with every step he took toward the altar. Steve Clayton was a man defined by his boundless energy and his unwavering dedication to those he held dear. After graduating college with a degree in finance, he had carved a path for himself as a shrewd and successful businessman. Alongside a partner, he had built a company called Physical Therapy Resources, a venture that blossomed into a national presence. Yet, success was never the sole measure of the man. His true wealth lay in his ability to give back. Driven by a goal he set in his youth, Steve retired at the age of 41, choosing to dedicate his subsequent years to mentoring young men, helping them navigate the complexities of starting businesses and finding purpose in their lives. He was, in every sense, a man who lived with an open heart. Life for Steve was an adventure, yet his own search for a lasting partner had been marked by challenges. He sought someone who could match his intellectual curiosity, his emotional depth, and his spirit of adventure. It was a tall order, but his family remained hopeful. In late 2009, seeking a change of pace, Steve moved from his home in Florida to the rolling landscapes of North Carolina. It was there, amidst the fresh start he had craved, that he met Lana Walsh. She was a nurse, 12 years his junior, and possessed a quiet demeanor that stood in striking contrast to Steve's gregarious personality. To those around them, the pairing seemed like the union of two distinct worlds. Yet Steve was certain. He referred to her affectionately as his Lana Sue, and for a time, A profound sense of peace settled over his life. The years that followed were filled with the joys of domestic life. In November of 2013, they celebrated their marriage in a beautiful ceremony at their home in Charlotte. Soon after, they sought a sanctuary of their own, finding a picturesque property on the banks of Lake Wylie in South Carolina. It was a place that felt like something from a postcard, an ocean blue home where they could indulge in their shared love for the outdoors. They filled the space with antiques and artworks, creating a life that seemed destined for long-term happiness. They were close to family, often hosting gatherings and reveling in the company of nieces, nephews, and the little ones who found a kindred spirit in Steve. He was, as ever, the child of heart, always ready to drop to the floor and play, his laughter ringing out as a testament to the joy he found in simple moments. However, the tranquility of their life began to fracture in June of 2018. Steve, a man of vitality, suddenly found himself gripped by a mysterious illness. He complained of vertigo, nausea, and a profound sense of weakness that left him bedridden for 36 hours. As a nurse, Lana assumed the role of his caregiver, assuring those who inquired that he was merely exhausted and that she was tending to his needs. For a brief period, the storm seemed to pass. By the 4th of July, Steve had regained his strength, hosting a festive celebration where he danced with his wife, appearing once again as the vibrant, affectionate man everyone adored. The relief felt by his family was immense. They believed the worst was behind them. But the silence that followed was deceptive. On July 21st, 2018, a call reached the emergency services in York County. When authorities arrived at the stunning lakefront home, they were met with a scene that shattered all expectations. Steve Clayton, the man who had been the life of every celebration, was gone. He lay at the base of the staircase, a silent witness to a tragedy that nobody could have foreseen. Lana, distraught and weeping, spoke to Sergeant Day, explaining that Steve had been suffering from vertigo and that she had been doing her best to care for him. She suggested he had fallen, a theory that sent shockwaves of grief through his extended family. In the days that followed, the veneer of a natural, tragic accident began to wear thin. When relatives gathered at the house, they were met with signs of neglect that felt entirely out of character for the man they knew. The master bedroom, once a sanctuary of refined taste, bore the marks of profound human struggle. A mattress, soaked through with signs of extended illness, was discarded by the family, and questions began to mount. Steve's sister, Rosemary, found it impossible to reconcile the story of a sudden heart attack with a man who had been meticulously managing his health and his life. When she learned that Steve had no will, an impossibility for a man of his financial acumen, the seeds of suspicion were sown. The investigation took a harrowing turn when the toxicology report returned from the